Chapter 41, Template Fusion, 99%. It was impossible to believe. Jonathan Kent had sold the farm he'd worked for half his life without consulting his family. "Dad, they sold the farm and house?" Clark asked, incredulous. Jonathan looked dazed, the printed contract trembling in his hand. "I sold it to Rex Rickman of Rickman Enterprises. He wants to build a chemical plant here." Martha's face went slack with disbelief. Her husband had always hated factories that dumped pollution without care. "I don't understand it," Jonathan muttered. The contract bore his name and a signature in his own handwriting. Jonathan stroked the paper as if it might explain itself, eyes unfocused, voice small. "I was in the barn when he came with his men and offered to buy the place. I refused him. I told him no." He paused, trying to put together what came next. He seemed regretful. He shook my hand and left. "And then," Clark pressed. Jonathan's face went empty. He was reaching for a memory that wasn't there. "I somehow signed this." He sounded as if he'd been told the news of a stranger's life. David's eyes narrowed. He examined the signature on the page as if it were a clue. "The handwriting matches, but you don't remember signing it?" Jonathan could only shake his head. Martha's anger rose hot and quick. She had the paper sent to a lawyer. "He says the contract is airtight," she said, voice breaking. "There are no loopholes. We have almost no chance in court. We have to move out in 3 days." Clark's face went pale. "This farm, this is our home. We've always lived here." Jonathan looked down at his hands and said nothing. "I inherited this land from your grandfather. I sold it for $100,000. I don't know why I signed." He looked as if he'd been robbed of more than land. No one had held a gun to them. No one forced Jonathan to sign in front of his wife and sons. That was the part that scared them most. The suddenness of it left the house heavy and silent. No one cared about lunch. Someone had to act. Clark brightened with an idea and turned to his parents. "I saved Rex Rickman's life once. I was taught not to expect repayment, but this isn't the time to be modest. Maybe I can talk to him, ask him to fix this." David watched him, then allowed himself a small, tight smile. The possibility that someone had used an ability to make Jonathan sign was growing more real to him. "It's an ability user," he said at last. For a strange, unaccountable lapse of memory, David could think of no other explanation. "Rickman's an ability user?" Clark's expression hardened. He and David had already encountered several people with powers, some who belted out electricity, some who could shapeshift, others who could mesmerize. The idea that someone could override a man's will wasn't unimaginable anymore. Like the person who attacked the school, like the one who took Tina. Martha and Jonathan exchanged a look of dawning alarm. How else could Jonathan have sold the farm he loved without a word? David shrugged, the move casual but cold. "Then we confront him." He met their parents' worry with an almost soothing tone. "Don't worry, I'll talk to him." He stood as if talking would be all that was needed. Clark read his brother differently. From previous incidents, David's easy assurance could mean he planned something far less subtle than a conversation. "I'll come with you," Clark said. "Be careful, both of you," Martha urged. Clark's presence seemed to steady them. "If it doesn't work, we'll find a place in town," Jonathan said, trying to comfort them. "It won't delay school. A family is a family wherever we live." David nodded once and walked out. Clark caught up, glancing back at the farmhouse. As they left, he said in a wry tone, "Mom and Dad don't know you don't need my protection. If anything, I might have to protect people from you." There was truth in the joke. The Kents didn't know David's nature. Clark could see it wearing on him. He couldn't tell their parents the whole truth, not the danger David posed when he lost control. Still, he felt compelled to cover for him. "Protect what?" David asked, eyebrow lifting. Clark's voice went low. "Protect the man who used his power to trick our father out of our home." David's expression hardened. Clark held his ground. "You don't have to be brutal every time." Clark watched the warning in David's tone and reached out, stopping him. "Rex Rickman's rich. If anything happens to him, Metropolis will eat it up. This isn't Smallville. If you turn someone into a vegetable again, I won't take the blame in front of Mom and Dad again," Clark finished, the threat trembling on his lips. David's eyes flicked to him. "What are you asking me to do?" he said flatly. Clark's voice was brittle with fear. "Don't do anything that will bring the newspapers down on us." David's lips twitched with a look of amused distaste. Rickman's enterprises dominated pesticide production across the region. If something catastrophic, or even just inexplicable, happened to him, it would be front-page news. A ping cut through David's mind, like a stray thought. A notification he'd seen 2 days ago surfaced again. Template Fusion, 99% complete. The odd little system update had been stalled at 99%, and he'd been hoping the final merge would let him display his abilities more freely, let him protect the family without forcing himself into hiding. He had the strength to handle this, but the family's fear, especially Clark's fear, gnawed at him. He pushed it aside. "Let's make this a contest," he said suddenly. "Whoever resolves this safely and properly first gets to claim they did it." Clark's shoulders slumped in secret relief. He didn't reveal the plan that had been forming in his head, an attempt to assert himself as elder brother, to show David he wasn't above discipline, to earn respect. Last time David had been heavy-handed, it had nearly ruined them. This time, Clark wanted to show he could protect the family without crossing a line. "Your idea's fine," David said. He sounded bored, as if he'd been offered a trifle. "No backing out." Clark anticipated being refused and jumped in before he could. He squared his broad shoulders and tried on a new posture, firm, authoritative, and beneath it, a trembling need for order. "I'm doing this for your own good." David cocked an eyebrow, amused and slightly irritated, as if thinking of producing a piece of kryptonite from some pocket to knock the older Kent back into place. For a moment, the old easy relationship flickered between them. The brother who tried to fix things with physical strength, the brother who didn't always play by the rules. "All right," David said finally. Clark blinked. He hadn't expected agreement so easily, and some of his surprise showed, but he kept it contained, matching breath and step as they headed toward Rickman Enterprises and whatever confrontation would decide the fate of the farm. Chapter 42. New Template. Knock knock. Chloe, still rubbing the sleep from her eyes and with pillow creases on her face, padded downstairs. She blinked when she saw Clark on the doorstep. "Clark, what's up? You come to play? Is Uncle Jonathan home?" Clark peered past her into the house, the tough guy act from earlier gone. He was back to his usual earnest self. "He hasn't come back from the factory. I had to make my own lunch again," Chloe grumbled. Her father was a department manager at Luther's fertilizer plant and was always busy. Clark's expression turned urgent. "Our family's farm. We're in trouble. Can you help me?" "Trouble? Come in." Even confused, Chloe didn't turn him away. She led him to the living room sofa, while Clark quickly told her what had happened. "I need information on this Mr. Rickman. A handshake got someone to sell his farm and house?" Chloe's eyes lit up. She loved investigating strange things. "Give me a minute. I'll get my laptop." She ran upstairs so fast the stairs creaked. Clark, meanwhile, palmed the blue-hooded cowl tucked in his pants pocket. His plan was to first figure out whether Rickman was a mutant, then get his address from Chloe, and then handle the rest himself. Chloe came back down with her laptop and opened it to start digging. She had built software that pulled together and summarized search results, easy for writing pieces for the school paper. As she scrolled, she paused and looked toward the door. "Oh, where's David?" It was a big matter. Why wasn't David here? Clark hesitated and scratched his head. He didn't have an answer. Unbeknownst to him, David hadn't been at home. After Clark left earlier, David had slipped away to a secluded forest outside Smallville, planning to welcome the fusion of a second template that had begun stirring inside him. He'd meant to refuse Clark's suggestion to get involved, but the template completion changed everything. On the forest edge, David had come to a stop, confirming no one else was around. Small text and prompts blinked in his mind like an interface. Thanos Template has been fused 100%. Loading new template. New template loading. 1%, 3%. It's the first time two templates are merging, he thought, cautious now. He didn't want to scare his parents by doing this anywhere near the farm. Heat rose through him, an inner furnace, as if molten fire ran through his veins. Universe energy thrummed in every cell. His bones crackled as something inside him fused. His heartbeat leapt. The purple tint that had stained his skin from past exertions began to ebb. He touched his chin. The deep grooves that had once marked his jaw were smoothing. A ripple of purple energy flashed from his fingertips. A distant tree took the strike as if hit by a laser, its trunk split in a jagged, smoking wound. One ripple after another arced out, sweeping the nearby trees. The energy within him roared. As the new template loaded and merged, the reserve power he'd never been able to control was trying to break free, like a tidal surge pressing against a dam. His chest felt stuffed and tight, yet something inside was about to burst. With a low growl, he threw a punch. A concentrated purple wave of universe energy thundered from his fist, gouging through the woods and punching holes in trunks for hundreds of meters. Bark and wood charred to ash. In a blink, it affected an area nearly a mile wide. David forced himself to pull back and rein in the output. Back at Chloe's, she read aloud what her program had turned up about Rickman. Rick Rickman, 42, attended Smallville High, graduated from Western Kansas University. After graduation, he worked in farm equipment sales. From a handshake to selling a whole farm, Chloe scrolled faster. After graduation, he floundered in sales, almost got fired. Then in his second year, he shot up to the top of the charts and dominated sales for 3 straight years. He used the huge bonuses to start his own company and go into business. Anything else? Clark asked, worried about who Rickman really was. Chloe flipped to corporate filings and news clippings. He was often criticized for chaotic management, but kept closing huge deals and made hundreds of millions, she said, frowning. Does that sound normal? Clark stared at the screen. Wasn't the year he nearly got fired the same year the meteor shower hit? David had mentioned the meteor shower before, and Clark's memory clicked. Yes, 1991, Chloe confirmed. Everyone in Smallville remembered that year. Where does he live now? Clark asked, suddenly on his feet. 146 Monty Street, Metropolis, Chloe read off. Clark grinned. Thanks, Chloe. Next time, caramel milk pudding's on me. I have to go. He darted off. Clark's speed was phenomenal, far faster than David's the way things had been, and with Chloe's quick digging, he saved time. He was determined to be first. Wait, Chloe saw another piece of news and called after him, but the hallway was already empty. Unlike David, whose movements left visible traces even at top speed, Clark was a streak, almost invisible. He drew the blue cowl from his pocket as he ran, slipping it on. This time he intended to stay a step ahead of his brother. David, however, hadn't stayed put. In the quiet of the forest, the birds startled and a thin plume of dust rose as his new energy settled. The purple sheen on his skin receded, and he clenched his fists, feeling a powerful tide of force under his control for the first time. He thrust his palm forward. A beam struck a fallen log and obliterated it completely. Nothing was left but a clean absence where wood had been. New template loaded. Black King template has been fused 3rd. Black King template? David's breath caught, equal parts surprise and joy. Now he understood why the latent energy could finally be unleashed. And not just that, this merger is more than 1 + 1. He squeezed his eyes shut, and to his own astonishment, a flash of dazzling purple light shot from them, cutting through the dim forest like a twin comet. Chapter 43, New Abilities to Manipulate Energy. The detached villa, its decor austere and Nordic minimalist, radiated the cool indifference of someone used to being an elite. After calmly settling matters with a few stubborn farm owners, Rickman came home, tossed his car keys onto the coffee table, and was about to head down to the wine cellar for a bottle of red, when a shadow in the glass top of the table drew his attention. Someone was standing directly behind him. He hadn't noticed them enter. He jumped, his hair prickling. "Who are you?" Tall, clad in blue work overalls like a lumberjack, heavy brown logging boots on his feet, and a blue hood with only 2 eye holes, the stranger spoke in a low voice. "Mr. Rickman, do not be afraid." "What do you want?" Rickman asked, annoyed but visibly relieved to see no weapon. "You used abnormal methods to force those farm owners to sell their farms and homes. That's not fair." "Control? I don't know what you're talking about." Rickman's eyes narrowed. "If you want money, there are easier ways than sneaking into my house." "I don't want your money," the man said. "I want you to cancel those contracts that were obtained by deceit." Clark stepped forward, his tall, powerful frame radiating an almost physical pressure. Rickman feigned fear and took a step back, and then lunged, trying to grab Clark's neck. In an instant, Rickman's hand slammed into empty air. Clark had moved behind him. I know your ability, Clark said calmly. If I don't touch you, you can't activate it. Rickman's face went pale. Jonathan, his father, had been clear-headed until he shook hands with the man who'd visited. Then his memory had slipped, and he'd signed. If Rickman could control people by thought alone, he wouldn't need such a simple trigger. The pattern suggested he needed physical contact to activate it, like Sean needing to touch someone to draw their body heat. If you want your ability kept secret, you'd better do what I say, Mr. Rickman. You, Rickman sputtered, stunned. He turned to the blue-hooded man and realized with dawning alarm, you have an ability too. Cancel the contracts, Clark said, or I'll make your little secret front-page news. Clark used the same blunt leverage Fran had once used against him. You choose, Mr. Rickman. Rickman hesitated, then his shoulders slumped. A flicker of calculation and fear crossed his face before he spoke. He didn't have to think long. On one hand, his biggest secret would be exposed, his multi-million-dollar enterprise's reputation ruined, the world staring suspiciously at him. On the other hand, the disputed property was undeveloped factory land worth only a few $100,000. All right, I promise. Wise choice, Clark said. I'll be watching. If those contracts aren't canceled before sunrise, tomorrow's headlines in this city will make room for you. With that, Clark vanished in a gust of wind that rustled the curtains. The tall figure was gone as if he had never been there. Rickman stood alone, fists clenched and face shifting through disbelief and anger. Then he noticed a few small clumps of dirt with grass on the dark gray marble floor where the man had stood. His eyes lit up. He crouched, picked them up carefully, and smirked. Fair? You know who I am, but I don't know who you are. That's not fair. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and sneered. Hello? Is this the Metropolis Geological Survey? I need to send in a few soil samples for testing. In the forest, David examined his hands and felt immense power thrumming beneath his skin. He punched a big tree, one too large for an adult to hug, and the trunk snapped with a sickening crack. The severed tree slashed against its neighbors and toppled, kicking up a cloud of dust. He turned and punched another tree. Wood splintered. This trunk flew several meters before thudding to the ground. I used the same force for both punches, he said aloud. The difference was that the second punch carried the kinetic energy he'd absorbed on the first blow. This was the Black King's ability. Absorb various forms of energy, convert them, store them, and release at will or use them to augment strength, speed, and endurance. He could take in kinetic energy, heat, electricity, even magic. His defenses were formidable. The Black King could theoretically drain even a small reactor if he wanted, David thought. That makes him a terrifying template. Energy roiled through David like an ocean. Fusing with the Thanos template had raised his absorption ceiling dramatically. Thanos, as an eternal mutant, carried universe energy in every drop of his blood and every cell, essentially becoming a vast energy reservoir. But right now, I seem to absorb mostly kinetic energy, David noted. He experimented. Absorbing kinetic energy was effortless, as natural as breathing or drinking water. He fired an energy beam from his hand and set wood chips alight. He tried to put his hand into a flame and found it much harder to draw the heat away. It's like having a throat so dry it's smoking, trying to gulp down raw grains. No smoothness at all, he muttered. He shook his head. The problem, he concluded, was an incomplete fusion rate. Withdrawing his hand from the fire, he inhaled deeply and exhaled. A sudden gust of wind snuffed the flames, preventing a wildfire. As his fusion progressed, he expected to be able to absorb electrical and thermal energy more easily. Eventually, fully fused, he should even be able to draw in magic energy. When that happens, my magic resistance will be terrifying, he thought. Most superheroes and villains lack special immunity to magic. For example, Clark's magical resistance is weak compared to his physical resilience. That's why people joke he has negative magic resistance. The Black King's power, though strong, had drawbacks. Internal energy would deplete with each release, requiring him to be hit or otherwise recharge. After merging with the Thanos template, those flaws were disappearing. David felt the universe energy within him regenerating on its own. His eyes shone. His eternal physiology let him spontaneously recover universe energy so he could fill his body with it. Approaching the absorption limit used to be dangerous for the Black King, he thought. Exceeding it could trigger an uncontrollable energy release, shredding the body or causing it to vanish. Now, with eternal durability, loss of control would at worst leave him with minor injuries, and he no longer needed to use his hands to draw energy. When the Black King absorbed power before, it required gestures to focus, similar to how other mutants used visible motions to activate their powers. But with every cell now capable of storing energy, such rituals were unnecessary. The fusion of two templates with his body had delivered returns far greater than simple addition. 1 + 1 had become significantly more than 2. Chapter 44, I will help you defeat your evil brother. Now, there shouldn't be anything on Earth with ordinary technology that can threaten me, not even a standard nuclear bomb. David felt his strength surge, and a faint smile tugged at his lips. Only an ultra-high-yield warhead, the sort that could devastate whole regions and trigger a nuclear apocalypse, might hurt him. And when he said ordinary technology, he meant it. The DC Universe had a way of producing Earth-born genius and black tech that could compete with cosmic powers. Metal Men, true AI constructs, Red Tornado, who could stand against Kryptonians, and Amazo, a machine that copied any power it witnessed and once beat the Justice League. Amazo was almost like Doomsday, a terrifying single-minded engine of destruction. Snapping back from the thought, David decided to try one more thing before he left. Eye beams. Thanos might soak and manipulate energy. He'd already tested blasting from his palms, so his eyes should be no different. He gathered the energy in his vision. After a moment of warmth, 2 purple beams flared from his eyes, searing the earth. They cut 2 blackened furrows that converged in a single scorched point. The sight thrilled him, and he pushed more power through. The ground sizzled, melting into rivers of molten rock. Heat rolled outward, drawing moisture from the soil, cracking the earth and withering nearby leaves. If he kept going, the trees could catch fire. Not wanting to spark a wildfire, David cut it off. The leftover purple glow in his irises made him look like a god standing over the world, intimidating and unreal. He blinked, the warmth faded. No problem, he said. There was no difference between firing from his hands and his eyes. Both worked, and neither posed a danger to him. Having tested everything, David calmed himself and turned to leave. He didn't care about Clark's talk of contests and winning. Although Clark's powers should make handling most threats easy, David still felt a little uneasy. Fully powered Superman could wobble sometimes. A younger version could as well. A dry snap, like a twig underfoot, cracked from the distance. "Come out," he said, frowning, eyes locking onto movement in a patch of undergrowth. He had been so excited by the new template and his own power that he hadn't noticed someone watching. A tall, striking woman stepped free from the bushes, shock still on her face. She stared at the scorched ground and murmured, "His eyes can burn everything." "It's you?" David blinked. He hadn't expected his observer to be someone he knew. The rumors are true. Kira's eyes shone, as if she had seen a deity descend. What rumors? David kept his expression cool but was wary. This woman wasn't ordinary. "When did you get here?" "I've known about your powers for a long time, David Kent. I won't tell anyone." Kira, drawn by the blast that had scorched a near mile, raised her hands to show she meant no harm. "You knew for a long time?" David's suspicion deepened. "When you and your brother Clark gave off that strange bug-like smell by the edge of the woods, I saw everything from deep inside the forest." She told him everything without hiding it. Hearing her, David's mind started to stitch things together. She'd seen him and Clark fight Garrick and had been watching them ever since. That explained the occasional feeling of being observed on campus. He didn't relax. "You kept quiet all this time. You better keep quiet." David's words were a clear, cold warning. He began to walk away. "Unless you want me to make sure you never speak again." "Wait, Nama." Kira's hand shot out. The weird name made David stop. "My name isn't Nama," he said, "and why should I be wary of Clark?" Clark had been a nuisance lately, overbearing, watchful, but not someone to fear. Kira's look was intense, almost worshipful. "In our tribe's legend, you are called Nama. Your brother is Segai." "Nama? Segai?" David tilted his head. He didn't understand. "What tribe?" "Our Kawaki tribe has a 500-year history. 5 centuries ago, a man from another world fell in love with our tribe's mother. From that forbidden union, our people were born." Kara's face lit with excitement as she spoke the tale her people had kept secret. When he left, he rose into the sky and prophesied. In 500 years, his people would return with heavenly fire. One would be called Nama, who would stop his brother Segai from destroying the Kawaki and the world. David raised an eyebrow. The story sounded like a primitive myth wrapped around an alien arrival, interesting but irrelevant to him. Aside from the alien part, it's just a legend. It doesn't involve me. You match the prophecy. Kira hurried to catch up with him. Nama doesn't just descend with heavenly fire. He has strength greater than 10 men combined, and his gaze can burn anything. You're claiming I fit all that? David stopped, skeptical. Kira's suspicion of him and Clark had grown after the meteor-like shower 17 years ago. Its timing lined up with the prophecy. Seeing both brothers with extraordinary strength and one with purple skin had pushed her to watch them closely. After I saw you in the forest, I observed you to figure out which of you was Nama and which was Segai. To prove she wasn't delusional, she revealed something else. Her hand shifted and became the white paw of a wolf. Until I saw the light shoot from your eyes, turning the earth to lava, I was unsure. Now I know. You are Nama. A wolf? David glanced at the paw. People have whispered about a giant white wolf in the woods at night. You're that? Kira's hand reverted to human form, and she pressed her palm to her chest. This is destiny, Nama. I am the chief's daughter of the Kawaki. I wear the bracelet left by our mother. I was the one who found you. On her wrist glinted a silver bracelet set with turquoise. Kira stood straighter, conviction hard in her voice. I will help you, with all my heart. I will help you defeat your evil brother Clark and stop him from destroying the world. David stared at her for a long moment, doubtful, amused, and wary. The legend might be true, the Kawaki might have a prophecy, but the name she gave him, Nama, and the villain she named Segai, didn't match anything he felt inside. He was an Earth native, not a chosen savior. And Clark, an apocalyptic threat? That seemed unlikely. Still, Kira's certainty and the evidence of her strange heritage made David pause. The world kept getting weirder. Maybe that was the one thing he could count on. Evil Clark? David's face twisted with something like surprise. He'd never heard anyone call his brother that before. Clark should have been here to hear it, to feel what it's like to be treated like a criminal. The legends going around your tribe don't have anything to do with me, David said. He didn't want Kira to pester him further. In a blur, his body flickered, and he was gone, moving off at nearly supersonic speed. A few dry yellow leaves swirled where he'd stood and drifted down. I can't turn into a wolf. Kira closed her hand around one of the falling leaves and watched where he had gone, her eyes filled with a fierce, troubled hope. The kindly old woman from the care home had warned her before she died. Don't get close to David and his brother, or your fate will fall into misfortune. If misfortune was her destiny, Kira thought, she wouldn't shy away. She was already prepared. As long as she could help Nama defeat Segai, now she understood why the transfer student had always been both friendly to David and guarded around him. Her ardent stare felt like the conviction of a believer. David felt a prickling unease under it. He had spent a lot of time in the forest, learning and testing his new abilities. By the time he returned, it was nearly afternoon. David, you're back? The gloomy mood that had hung over the house lifted the moment he walked in. Clark couldn't hide a little triumphant smile. Rickman already sent someone to cancel the contract. Not just ours. Several other farms, too, Clark said. He'd never felt this kind of satisfaction before, helping others and, crucially, outshining his brother by resolving the problem quickly and cleanly. Maybe now David would see there were better ways than brute force. We don't have to move anymore, Jonathan said, relieved. Martha and Jonathan smiled and nodded. The farm and the house are back in the family. Clark had told them how he'd done it. He'd been anxious, so he left David behind, went to Chloe's place first, and, hiding his identity, forced Rickman, who had cheated his way into the farm, to cancel the contract. Jonathan and Martha retold the story over, and David heard the whole thing. They worried about their sons using abilities. What if the meteorite had made many metahumans? But for now, they were relieved. You must be hungry. I'll make lunch right away. You'll be off to school later, Martha said, suddenly bustling into the kitchen. The heavy weight lifted from the household. Jonathan, patting Clark's shoulder, followed his wife into the kitchen as if their earlier argument had never happened. The dark clouds dispersed. Home felt warm and ordinary again. David stood beside his brother while Clark crossed his arms, puzzled. "Why don't you look happy? Is it because I fixed this before you did?" David glanced at their parents and frowned. "Don't you think Mom and Dad were too kind? The house and farm were ours to begin with. They were content simply to have them back, after everything." David had long seen how generous his parents were, and sometimes that kindness made them easy targets. "I don't think Mom and Dad are very happy either," he added quietly. Clark pulled him aside. He'd overheard their parents talking about reporting Rickman to make sure he couldn't use his abilities to cheat people again. But if someone suddenly reported Rickman as abnormal, wouldn't that make him wonder whether the man in blue, Clark, was involved? Jonathan and Martha had hesitated and kept the worry to themselves. "We can team up with the other farm owners and file a report together," Clark whispered. David, watching his parents cook, frowned. Wouldn't that make the target too obvious? It would be natural for several owners, wondering why they'd suddenly sold their farms, to suspect they'd been tricked or drugged, and to ask the police to investigate. Clark brightened. "That's a plan. If we don't do something, they'll keep worrying, and it will fester." He looked at David with a little confusion. David had suggested the idea, which seemed out of character, gentle and conciliatory. Was David softening because of his example? Had he misunderstood him all along? "As long as I keep my identity hidden, the incident where you beat someone into a vegetative state won't happen again, right?" Clark added, relieved. David didn't believe it would be so simple. "A baseless report without evidence might not get the police to act," he said. Rickman was rich, connected, and likely had influence, plus whatever abilities he had. Add his reach to that, and it's almost guaranteed to fail. He'd brought the idea up mainly to ease his parents until tomorrow. After tomorrow, this wouldn't be a problem anymore. He kept that part to himself. "David, Clark, lunch is ready," Martha called. They ate quickly. After 2 bites, David looked up and praised his mother's apple pie. She'd outdone herself. Watching their sons, Jonathan took Martha's hand in the kitchen. The afternoon sun poured in and warmed the room. Caring for the farm was tiring work, and sometimes people only appreciated what they had after it was almost gone. They didn't get much rest that afternoon, but both parents felt a soft, contented peace. "If our family can stay like this forever, that would be the greatest happiness," Martha sighed. "I'm afraid that's unlikely," Jonathan said with a smile. "You two will go off to college eventually, get married, start your own families. I wonder what kind of wives Clark and David will find." Martha's imagination wandered, and she coughed self-consciously. David and Clark, both with keener hearing than most people, exchanged a slightly awkward look and choked on their food. "Eat slowly, you two," Martha chided gently, coming over with 2 glasses of water and fussing over them. The kitchen filled with small, ordinary comforts, the very thing they all needed right now. Chapter 46. Clark. Burned by a small spark, night fell and stars hung high. Dark clouds drifted in, swallowing half the moon. Rickman came home after a long afternoon of handling company affairs. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting light across his face as he sat in an armchair, his expression shifting like an animal ready to devour. Ever since the meteor shower granted him abilities more than a decade ago, Rickman's life had been smooth. He wasn't the small, subservient salesman anyone could boss around anymore. He was successful and well-known. The taste of being threatened, the taste of humiliation. "I haven't felt that in a long time, Blue Man," he hissed. The small clumps of dirt from shoe soles found on his living room floor had been sent for testing. Results would come in tomorrow. "Send the soil from those farms to the Geological Survey for comparison. It won't be hard to confirm which farm you're connected to." Rickman's eyes burned as he fiddled with several sealed test tubes, soil samples he'd secretly had people collect from those farms that afternoon. Soil testing was complicated. Organic and inorganic content, microbes, even fertilizer brands show different signatures. Farm soil varies widely. Some raise cattle and mix in manure, some grow corn, some fruit. Any of it could tie a person to a place. "From this, it won't be hard to track you down, Blue Man." Only a few hours had passed from signing the land acquisition contract to the masked blue man's sudden appearance and threat at his home that noon. It had happened in a small rural town. Rickman didn't believe some random masked vigilante had just heard and come to uphold justice. It definitely has something to do with those farmers. A gust lifted the curtains, and moonlight like silver gauze spilled into the room. A shadow had appeared on the sofa without Rickman noticing. "You're quite meticulous," a deep voice said. "Who?" Rickman sprang from his chair like a startled bird, grabbed a silver pistol hidden under the seat, and aimed at the shadow on the sofa. After the blue man had broken into his home earlier, Rickman had hidden guns around the house just in case. Wherever someone goes, they leave traces. The shadow on the sofa didn't seem to care about the gun. It seems someone got so pleased with being one step ahead of me, he forgot other things. Hearing that Rickman was sending the soil for comparison, David had guessed what happened. A certain son of Krypton might have been a bit overenthusiastic or nervous doing this for the first time and had left clues. Someone almost left a tail dangling, David mused. He rose, stepping from the shadows into the light. "Who are you?" Rickman demanded. The purple skin made Rickman's eyes widen. The gun in his hand no longer gave him confidence. After merging with the second template, the vertical lines on David's chin had smoothed. Still, when he used the Eternal's formidable physique, his skin inevitably took on a purple tint. He'd arrived at near supersonic speed, and the color had manifested. David moved without warning, materializing before Rickman. Before Rickman could react, David grabbed him by the throat and carried him out of the villa. Rickman gasped, the scenery blurring. Seconds later, after a dizzying spin, David tossed him onto cold concrete in a dark, deserted alley. "Where is this?" Rickman scrambled up, scared and disoriented, vaguely recognizing the street as somewhere in Metropolis. "Your burial ground," David said. Rickman stared at the figure, radiating a terrifying aura. His heart hammered. "Who exactly are you?" "You don't need to know who I am." David's voice was cold. Purple light flashed from David's eyes. Rickman's pistol somehow appeared in David's hand. With a grinding crack, it was crushed into bent scrap and then melted into molten iron that flowed between David's fingers. "You," Rickman choked, his throat tightening. He couldn't form the words to describe the disbelief and fear. "You only need to know that you caused a couple, who should never have been anxious, to argue all morning," David said. "You only need to know you coveted a house and land you had no right to." This couldn't end with simply getting the property back and walking away, David thought. Wrongdoings must be paid for. "I have a lot of money. I can give it all to you. Just spare my life." Rickman trembled, purple light reflected in his eyes. He didn't understand why taking land from a few small-town farmers had brought such peril. In Metropolis, he had always been able to do as he pleased. 30 million. No, 80 million. Before he could finish, David's face remained unmoved. Two beams shot from his eyes, cutting through the darkness. Rickman was incinerated into a pile of ashes that drifted in the cold, damp alley. David turned and walked away, vanishing into the night. The next morning at the school gates, Clark caught up with David. His face was full of worry. "This morning, my parents and a few farmers went to the police station to report him missing. Rickman's gone." "Did you kill someone again?" Clark asked, unable to help the suspicion. A detective had gone missing not long ago. It was hard not to connect the dots. He had wondered at David's calmness the previous day. By the end, he couldn't hold back his frustration. "Isn't it normal that he would flee Metropolis, afraid of exposure, after you revealed him?" David shrugged. "Wherever he goes, with his skills, he can live comfortably." "No," Clark started. He wanted to press further, but as they walked onto campus, David casually pulled a pitted, fist-sized meteorite from his pocket. Clark recoiled. "David, I just asked you 2 questions, and you pull a meteorite on me?" Clark protested. David hefted it in his hand. "Don't misunderstand. Remember Mr. Pratt Reagan, the geography teacher, gave us a homework assignment? You mean the one who told Avery not to call him Dad at school, and who got on Avery for only doing half the homework?" Clark said. David nodded. "He asked us to collect various rocks and identify them. I was assigned meteorites and rose quartz." Smallville billed itself the meteorite capital of the world. Meteorites were so common here, such homework wasn't ridiculous. Clark, wary of meteorites, watched David leave and planned to ask about Rickman again after school. That afternoon, when classes let out, the sky had gathered low, heavy clouds as if rain would fall any minute. Chloe had pulled Clark aside to help proofread the school paper, and David had disappeared long before. Clark missed the bus and walked home, intending to use the time to figure out how to question David about Rickman later. 10 minutes later, he crossed the bridge and suddenly saw Avery standing on the railing, headphones on, tossing pebbles into the dam below. Avery Reagan, Mr. Reagan's son, had been publicly scolded earlier that day. Clark shouted, "Avery, get down! It's dangerous!" Avery, drenched in loud rock music, didn't seem to hear him. The wind whipped and a jagged flash of lightning split the sky. Clark leapt forward, wrapped his arms around Avery's waist, and tried to pull him off the railing. Standing on a high place with electronics made someone very vulnerable to lightning. Crack! Lightning struck, hitting both of them. The meteorite in Avery's backpack, part of his homework, suddenly glowed, and the bolt that connected them flashed green. Sparks sizzled. Clark felt a violent electric shock run through him. He cried out and collapsed. Avery hit the ground too, his clothes torn and smoldering, sparks still clinging to him. Clark tried to get up and help. "Are you okay, Avery?" he asked, mostly thinking he himself was fine aside from the jolt. But when Clark reached to haul Avery up, the sparks on Avery's clothes burned Clark's skin. He let out a sharp cry, clutching his hand. Blisters had already formed. Pain shot through him. It was just a small spark. Why? Above them, sparks still danced on Avery's chest, but Avery seemed unhurt beyond dazedness, blinking groggy. "Clark?" he mumbled, half awake. Chapter 47. Incapacitated Clark Rain hammered the farm, turning the green fields into mud. Dark clouds swallowed the sky, and the air smelled of wet earth. Inside the house, Jonathan, Martha, and David sat by the window with steaming cups of tea. Raindrops, the size of beans, rattled against the glass. "Why isn't Clark back yet?" Martha asked, peering out into the storm. She cradled her cup, steam fogging the panes. "I saw Chloe calling him earlier," David said, taking a careful sip. "He's probably helping her proofread or something." Jonathan forced a smile, but his jaw was tight. "It's only a heavy rain, not a flood. Clark's fine." A sudden knock at the door cut through the conversation. The latch rattled, the doorway opened, and a tall figure stumbled in. His clothes were torn and caked with mud, hair plastered to his forehead. He collapsed to the floor with a groan. Lightning flashed outside and lit his pale face. Streaks of blood ran down one cheek. "Clark, what happened?" Martha sprang up, horror in her voice. They had never seen him like this. Jonathan and David rushed forward to help him sit up. Martha pressed a hand to his forehead and flinched. "Mercy, your forehead's burning up. Clark, are you all right?" David's expression changed. He took Clark's limp weight in his arms. The younger brother's training instincts flared. The last time Clark had looked this beaten, David thought, had been when kryptonite was involved. "Did Whitney see you and Lana hiding from the rain on your way home?" he asked bluntly, searching for an explanation. "No." Clark's voice was small. He slumped into a chair, soaked and shaking. Panic darkened his eyes. "David, my powers are gone." The room went very still. "What do you mean, gone?" Jonathan asked, trying to keep panic from his voice. Clark's words tumbled out. "I was struck by lightning on the way home. Something flashed, greenish, and after that, nothing. I can't feel them. I can't do anything." He looked at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. A drop of fresh blood slipped from his nose to his fingers. His vision blurred, and he fell forward, fainting onto the table. "Clark." David rocked him lightly, then checked his pulse. "He's breathing," he frowned. "But his pulse is racing. He's hot, feverish. He fainted from exhaustion, but there's more to this." Martha moved as if to throw a coat on and go to the doctor, but Jonathan gripped her arm. "Wait," he said quietly. "If a doctor pokes around and finds something, I don't want the boy exposed. We should be careful." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "But we should at least get him looked at." "It might be nothing permanent," Jonathan said. "Clark's not an ordinary child. Maybe this is a phase. Let him rest, give him something for the fever, and if it doesn't improve, we'll go." David shook his head, conflicted. Or maybe he inhaled something. Kryptonite dust can do this. He checked Clark's breathing again. 2 doses of medicine and rest should help for now. He helped carry Clark up to bed. What had happened? David's face was tight with worry as the 3 men carried Clark upstairs while rain drummed on the roof. Far from the farm, Avery was running home through the storm. His blonde hair and clothes were soaked, backpack slapping his shoulder. Without warning, his legs moved faster than he expected. His speed surged uncontrollably. He streaked across the road like a shot from a sling, tearing through the rain with a roar. He slammed into a massive roadside tree, and in a momentous crash, the tree exploded into splinters and flew apart like a shot tree trunk from a rifle. Avery stumbled free, unhurt, blinking at the wreckage. I'm fine. How am I? How didn't I get hurt? He pressed a hand to his chest, heart racing. The memory of the impact should have destroyed him. He laughed, breathless and wild. The speed had felt like something out of Angel Warrior comics, the hero who ran faster than sound. Testing it, he wound up and swung a fist experimentally. The air detonated with a sonic boom. A gust ripped forward, clearing raindrops and hurling branches aside. A cone of destruction fanned out in front of him, knocking down trees in a line. For a few seconds, Avery stood in stunned, elated silence, then threw back his head and laughed with a manic, liberated glee. "With this, nothing can stop me," he cried. He was already thinking of skipping school, of defying his strict father, of the freedom power could buy. His backpack strap had snapped in the collision, and the pack tumbled, spilling books and homework across the wet ground. A small, fist-sized rock fell from the pack and thudded on the sod. It glowed a faint, uncanny green. As Avery stepped past it, his legs gave out. A sudden burning pain shot through his skin, and he crumpled into the mud. My powers gone? He glared up at the glowing stone, alarm and suspicion warring on his face. What is this thing? He crawled to the rock, which shimmered like a tiny alien heart, and felt a strange heat radiating from it. By morning, the rain had passed, and bright sunlight poured through the curtains. Clark opened his eyes to find himself in his own bed, a cool cloth against his forehead. He felt steadier, sweat sticky at his temples, but better. His parents and David sat around him, relief plain on their faces. "How do you feel?" Martha asked, hovering. Clark pushed the covers back and swung his legs to the floor. A warmth rose in his chest at the sight of his family. He smiled weakly. "I'm fine." David held his gaze, brows knit. "Then tell us exactly what happened." Clark took a slow breath and felt the memory peel itself forward. "After school, I went toward the dam bridge. Avery, he was there trying to help someone. I saw lightning strike. It wasn't normal lightning. It was green. We got hit, and then something in my chest, like everything, went out." Martha and Jonathan exchanged a glance. David's mouth pressed into a thin line. "A meteorite," Martha whispered, remembering the color, the smell, the flash. "You see, there was that green light. It sounds like it could have been kryptonite." David nodded slowly. He had been thinking the same thing. Lightning interacting with whatever that green rock was could have produced an effect similar to kryptonite dust, enough to weaken Clark temporarily and give him a feverish collapse. Clark sat up straighter, looking between them. "Do you think that's it?" Jonathan reached out and squeezed his son's shoulder, as if to steady him and himself at once. Outside, the farm lay bright and wet, the storm already a rumor. Inside, the family tried to make sense of an afternoon that had left one boy inexplicably powerless and another holding a strange, glowing stone. Chapter 48, The World Will Be His, Avery's Playground. "A meteorite? What about the meteorite?" Jonathan asked, confused by his younger son's remark. "Clark isn't invincible. He gets weak and sick around kryptonite, like an acute allergic reaction." He turned to Clark. "Is that true? Clark, why didn't you and David ever tell your mother and me?" Jonathan's eyes widened. The 2 brothers had kept something huge from them. "We're busy enough running the farm," he added, half to excuse their silence. Clark forced a smile. His abnormalities had always been enough to worry his parents. Sometimes, though, his abilities eased their minds more than they worried. "If you knew I was vulnerable to kryptonite," he said quietly, "you'd worry about me even more." "Clark," Martha sighed and drew her elder son into a hug. "Maybe being ordinary isn't such a bad thing." Clark hesitated. When he had powers, he'd often felt lonely, different from everyone else. After David discovered abilities of his own, that loneliness had faded. Losing powers wouldn't break him. What troubled him more was what it would mean for his brother. If Clark couldn't stop David, what would restrain him? David caught Clark's worried look and rolled his eyes. Son, as long as your body's okay, that's what matters. Jonathan and Martha reassured him. Whether he could lift a pickup or not, he was their son. At least now you don't have to hide things. Jonathan added after a moment. Clark found a few silver linings. He wouldn't have to avoid sports at school or hide because of Lana's necklace. He could join the football team and be around Lana freely. The thought brightened him a little. Yesterday, it might not have been just you who lost your powers, David said abruptly, watching Clark drift back into thought. Clark cleared his throat and adopted a serious expression. Lightning struck from the sky. It hit you and Avery. He analyzed the facts aloud. You were damaged but recovered. Why didn't Avery turn to charcoal? He probably awakened powers, David said bluntly. The lightning had been tinted green. Kryptonite had passed through Avery and left him unharmed. David didn't believe Avery wouldn't get changed in some way. Clark's expression hardened. We need to go to Avery's house and check. Avery, where did you go yesterday? Avery's mother asked at dinner, worry written all over her face. I went to your room to tidy up. Why is your backpack missing? Why are your clothes shredded, like they were burned? I was cleaning my room. I'm fine, Avery said, eating his steak with a dark look. Something incredible had happened to him. The lightning had given him near godlike strength, but it also left him with a crippling weakness. Whenever he came near kryptonite, he grew weak, sick, and in pain. He became weaker than an ordinary person, unable to stand. Because his father Reagan taught geography, the house and the garage was full of rock specimens, even meteorites. Avery had tested himself when he got home and confirmed it. Kryptonite crippled him. Why would I gain this power and have such a fatal flaw? He muttered. His hands clenched. Plans that had seemed inevitable suddenly felt fragile. He could not tolerate such a glaring weakness when the planet should have been his to command. You were supposed to be home after school. Why didn't you come back? Reagan demanded. He had been made a laughingstock when his son didn't finish homework and the office had ribbed him about it. Reagan's temper flared. I went out, Avery said, flat and dangerous. You came home late. You embarrassed me at school, Reagan snapped. Do you know what that looked like? Say less, Beth interjected, patting her husband's arm, trying to calm him. Avery stood up suddenly, twisting his knife and fork in his hand and glaring at his father. I'm 18. You can't control me. I won't control you? Look at your grades. Do you even think you'll get into college? Reagan shot back, rising to his feet as well. Go to college? Avery scoffed. The word left his mouth like an insult. Your vision is so small. He tightened his fist and felt the terrifying power coiled inside him, power that could obliterate tanks, punch through planes. His eyes gleamed with a new hunger. You have no idea what I can do. He let his knife and fork clatter to the floor. A thin, almost sinister smile crossed his face as he wiped his hands. I'm done being held back by this town. This small town was littered with meteorites, the very things that could restrain him. If he left, the world would be his playground. He spoke the words to the stunned room. I'm leaving. I won't stay where I'm suffocated. Reagan's face went white with anger and fear at the same time. Beth tried to stop things from exploding further, but it was too late. Avery's decision settled like a weight in the air. After a tense exchange, Avery promising he'd be all right, the rest too bewildered to argue, Avery stormed out. Clark and David had left Jonathan and Martha's house soon after. They were walking the muddy, waterlogged road toward Avery's neighborhood, worry pressing at Clark's chest. If Avery has powers, he shouldn't misuse them, Clark said. He remembered Avery's swagger, standing on a bridge railing in a storm, headphones on, listening to music as if daring the sky itself. That image made him uneasy. David's tone was colder. Let go of your savior complex. What do you mean by that? Clark asked. You can't play nanny to everyone, David snapped. People make their choices. They have to deal with the consequences. Clark bristled. He's just a kid going through his own stuff. Don't be so harsh. David cut him off. Have you forgotten how old you are? Clark was only 18. Growing up with unusual circumstances had forced him to mature faster than most, but he was still young. He would try to reason with Avery. He didn't want to fight. They walked in silence for a while. Then David stopped mid-step, eyes narrowing. About 100 meters down the road, something streaked past with a force that warped the air, a shadow moving at tens of times the speed of sound, gone in a flash. All David could make out was a blurred trail. Even with his enhanced sight, the figure was indistinct. The scene tugged at a strange familiarity. Clark, now an ordinary person, blinked and saw nothing where David had looked. He followed his brother's gaze. "What is it, David?" David's jaw tightened as he watched the disappearing blur. Whatever it had been, it shouldn't have been moving like that in a small-town night. David stared for a long moment at the place where the figure had vanished, his chest tight with disbelief. How could anyone in a small Kansas town move almost as fast as Clark? He glanced toward the direction he'd seen the blur disappear. That came from Avery's house? His expression shifted several times as a strange possibility occurred to him. Clark's powers might not just be gone temporarily. "Let's go, Clark." He pulled a stunned Clark with him, and they hurried to Avery's house. The front door had been shattered, splinters and chunks of wood scattered across the lawn as if blasted outward. A woman's sobs echoed from inside. "Oh no!" Clark rushed through the doorway. Their geography teacher, Reagan, was propped up on the sofa, a cut on his forehead and a dazed look on his face. Avery's mother, Beth, clung to her husband, wailing as if her heart were ripped out. Clark swung a glance over them and exhaled in relief. They were bruised and shaken, but not badly hurt. "Aunt Beth, what happened?" David followed, frowning as he crouched to look at the broken door. "You said Avery came back yesterday, and since then he's been different?" Beth's eyes were rimmed in red. "He tried to run away just now. His father tried to stop him, but he threw him." Her voice broke. Avery just brushed his arm and Reagan flew across the dining table, 7, 8 meters, and landed on the sofa. If it hadn't been for the couch, he'd be in the hospital. Then Avery kicked down the door. There were these bangs and a gust of wind, and he was gone in an instant. Reagan was still bewildered. His son had shown strength far beyond normal. "Run away? Where did he go?" Clark pressed, anxious. They needed to find Avery before his panic and rage led to something irreversible. "Wait a minute, Clark." David's face hardened. Beth's description had sounded familiar in a way that made his stomach drop. He pulled Clark back into the doorway. "Doesn't her description, defense unaffected by lightning, enormous strength, speed too fast for the eye, sound familiar? Not a mutation?" Clark blinked. The abilities were uncanny, but Garrick had shown similar signs earlier. Before David could answer, he told them what he'd seen outside. A figure left this direction at dozens of times the speed of sound. David's eyes went distant. "I don't think it's a coincidence." He let the thought hang between them. "You lost your powers at the same time Avery changed. Do you think the lightning and the meteorite could have transferred your abilities to him?" Clark stared at him, stunned. "You mean my powers went to Avery?" Before David could nod, he asked Beth again in a more urgent tone. "Aunt Beth, Avery is very dangerous right now. Where did he go?" Beth wiped her face with shaking hands. "He said this place made him uncomfortable. He wanted to go to a paradise for the powerful, somewhere laws don't bind, where numb people can be crushed and conquered." She recited Avery's parting words through tears. "He said he'd come back. When he does, he'll erase everything that makes him uncomfortable. By then, nothing in the world will be able to stop him." "He said that?" Clark's jaw tightened. David sneered inwardly. Garrick had imagined himself a step ahead of everyone. Now Avery, newly gifted with Kryptonian-like strength and speed, talked about becoming something like a tyrant. A paradise for the powerful, not bound by law. He turned his head toward the direction the fast figure had disappeared. He didn't need to say more. That place? Gotham. Gotham? Gotham? Clark's face darkened. It was close to Metropolis, a city where crime and cruelty could make people numb and where the strong ruled by force. If Avery was headed there, it would be worse than dangerous. After calming Reagan and Beth as best they could, Clark and David went home and told Jonathan and Martha everything they'd learned. Jonathan's frown deepened. If Clark's powers had truly been transferred, that was a disaster. Martha looked pale and frightened. What if Avery goes wrong in Gotham and uses those powers to do terrible things? They all knew how much restraint Clark needed to use his strength responsibly. An impulsive Avery with no moral training in a city like Gotham could be catastrophic. That's the problem, David said. Avery isn't thinking about mending fences. He has bigger plans. A cold little smile passed over his face as he imagined Avery's words, coming back and erasing everything that offended him. David suspected the teenager might already have discovered kryptonite as a weakness, and that terrified him. We have to get Avery back before he destroys everything with my powers. Clark clenched his fists. He could not accept innocent people being hurt because of him. Martha put a hand to her mouth. How could we stop him? David took a breath. I might have to go on a long trip, Mom, Dad. Jonathan sat forward, concern etched into his face. How are you going to do that, son? David reached into his pocket and produced a thumb-sized meteorite. With this. Clark instinctively covered his face at the sight of the lump of rock, expecting the sickly green glow and instant pain he associated with kryptonite. But the stone only gave off a faint phosphorescent sheen, barely noticeable in daylight. When Clark touched his skin, nothing happened. I'm fine, he said, surprised. David wasn't surprised. On the way home, he'd already tested the meteorite on Clark without telling him. Avery's not just similar to you. His physiology and his weakness are the same. Martha's eyes widened in alarm. It's still dangerous. You'd be going to Gotham with just that? Jonathan's hand rested on David's shoulder. Sit down. Let's think of a plan. Don't rush into this. David shook his head. He looked at his parents, then at Clark. He'd watched the way things had changed since Clark lost his powers. The emotional reward their family relied on had shrunk dramatically, and the speed at which abilities seemed to fuse had slowed to a crawl. What had been steady progress now felt like crawling. The main source of what he called emotional points, their growth engine, had vanished. That alone pushed him toward action. I know what you're worried about, he said quietly. But I can't wait for things to get worse. Martha's voice trembled. You don't have to do this alone. David gave a small, steady smile. I won't be reckless. He looked at them all, determined. You don't need to worry about me. Chapter 50. Bank Robber Batman. Actually, Mom and Dad, you don't have to worry about me. Having gained new abilities, David decided he wouldn't hide everything any longer. He still couldn't reveal his eternal mutant form. He didn't want to alarm his parents, so he planned to demonstrate his energy control ability instead. What do you mean? His father asked, puzzled. A smile flickered across David's face as he raised his hand. A compact ball of purple energy gathered but didn't explode. The light pulsed, condensed. I have some special abilities too. I can take care of myself. The purple glow filled the room. Son, what is this? Martha breathed. Jonathan and Martha stared, stunned, as a soft purple light poured from their younger son's palm like a tiny amethyst sun. Clark's eyes went wide. This wasn't how he'd imagined David revealing anything. The living room fell into a stunned silence, giving their parents time to process the surprise. You can control energy? David went upstairs to get ready to leave, and Clark followed him, incredulous. You hid some of your abilities from me? Clark had always told David everything about his powers. Learning his brother had kept this from him stung. It's an ability I just awakened, David said. In his room, David pulled a wooden box from under the bed and set the heavy thing on the table with ease. The crate was about the size of a baby's cradle. Really? Believe it or not, David replied. Clark leaned in as David opened the box. Inside lay dozens of kryptonite chunks, various sizes, glowing faintly green, 70 or 80 pieces at a quick estimate. These meteorites, Clark started, dumbstruck. How could there be so many? If Clark hadn't already lost his powers, the sight might have sent him fainting. He stared at his brother. What are you collecting all these for? Collecting, David said, raising an eyebrow. Is that not allowed? Clark felt his anger rise. Only a few days after David's one's vulnerability to kryptonite had been revealed, he'd amassed a whole crate of it. Do you expect me to believe that? David casually removed a slightly larger piece. Energy beams shot from his eyes, thin, precise like surgical lasers. Under his control, the hard green rock split neatly. Layers fell away as if cut by a hot blade. You can shoot energy beams from your eyes? Clark asked, astonished. It's silly to carry raw rock, David said, finishing the job quickly. And raw kryptonite's radiation is weak and messy. He blew away the green dust. In his palm lay a ring cut from the inner core of a kryptonite crystal, an emerald-green band that still gave off a faint glow even in daylight. Clark's face went ashen. He stepped back instinctively, the old psychological nausea still there, even if the physical weakness wasn't. David, once you bring Avery back, you'll destroy this, right? David placed the box back under the bed and slipped the ring onto his right index finger without answering. Clark's voice thinned with foreboding. You'll destroy it, right? Clark wanted to go with him, but with no powers, Jonathan and Martha wouldn't allow it. It was better he stayed home and didn't get in David's way. Downstairs, David was ready to leave. No luggage, just the ring. At the door, Jonathan and Martha watched him go, worry carved on their faces. Are you sure you can bring Avery back safely? Jonathan asked. There won't be any problems, David said, calmer now that he'd shown his ability. My energy control is great for defense. Clark's punches can't get through it. Really? Martha glanced at Clark. Clark forced a reluctant nod. He hadn't tested it, but he didn't want to alarm their parents more. He stepped forward and hugged David tightly. Guilt gnawed at him. This whole situation had started because of him. Please be careful, he murmured. David hugged back, waved, and left. Gotham's not far. I'll be back in a few days. Jonathan held Martha as they watched their son go. May God watch over David, Jonathan whispered. David felt their worry like a weight. Whether he'd hidden his abilities or revealed them, their concern didn't change. He left an afterimage behind and accelerated away. Gotham wasn't far, just a strip of sea away from Metropolis. The two cities mirrored each other across the water, tied by trade and culture. Like Metropolis, Gotham was a modern city of glass and steel. It even had an elevated tram network. Metropolis lacked, arteries threading elevated rails through the city to feed its heart, Wayne Tower. But unlike Metropolis, Gotham's glamorous surface hid rot. Crime clung to the city like a stain. Lead gray clouds blanketed the sky and a cold drizzle fell. Gulls with soggy feathers perched on gargoyles jutting from high walls, grooming themselves listlessly. One bird peered down, and in the reflection beneath it, a lone black umbrella moved through the street. Gotham always seems to brood, David murmured as an elevated tram clattered by. He wore a gray trench coat and lifted a corner of his umbrella to look up at the dull sky. This was his impression of the city. He'd never been here on a sunny day. How can a city this damp not breed mold and filth? In a nearby alley, the city's seedier side played out. A pale man shifting a roll of cash and looking around like a nervous dealer. A line of people waiting, shoulders hunched. A gaunt, elderly man lay against the wall, beard tucked in, eyes reflecting the gloom. Ragged kids huddled around a trash fire, warming gloved hands. When someone looked their way, they glared like stray dogs guarding scraps. This, David thought, was Gotham's center. He closed his umbrella and walked into Gotham National Bank. Its stone facade looked like a fortress. Inside, it was bright and spacious. Marble columns, soft brown sofas, clear display windows. The decor married the classical and the modern. Old things can be refreshed. A lobby manager was saying to customers, holding a free cup of coffee, "Remember when the old coffee machine left grounds in everyone's cup?" The manager crowed. Look at Gotham National now. Modern equipment, upgraded security, will guard your wealth better than ever. David paid the spiel no mind and strode across the marble toward a counter. Finding one person in a city of millions without super senses wasn't easy, but first he needed funds. Don't get ahead of yourself. Sir, a voice cut through. A team of robbers burst in, men in suits with submachine guns, black bags, and red hoods. One of them taunted the manager, gun leveled. I prefer the banks of 60 years ago. Those vaults weren't as thick. You couldn't even blow them open with a tank today. Screams erupted. Before people could run, a shot cracked, and the bank manager's head fell forward, lifeless. Tradition is important, the leader said, as if commenting on a meal, then put a finger to his lips. His whisper chilled everyone. Now lie down like rats. One sound, and we'll use you to decorate the walls. Robbing a national bank in broad daylight, Gotham at its brazen worst. David glanced at the scene and felt the city's grit settle around him like a second skin. Every robber wore a red rose pinned to his chest. Their suits looked more like formal wear than thug wear. Gotham's criminals did have a certain flair. Hey, there's one who didn't lie down, the leader observed, smiling as if seeing a rude guest at a party. Doesn't he understand the etiquette? Only one person remained standing. David, cool and composed, scanned the room with mild curiosity as men who could kill strolled through the lobby like caterers. The leader gestured. Red Hood 5, teach this disobedient gentleman a lesson. A hulking thug moved in front of David, jamming a gun at his head. Kneel. I said kneel. He drove a boot into David's knee. The blow landed like against a pillar. David didn't budge. The attacker's foot stung. Under his hood, Red Hood 5's surprise showed in his eyes. David raised an eyebrow and let a small, dry smile touch his lips. Facing the man who'd just kicked him, he said casually, I'd heard Gotham's citizens had it rough, but I didn't expect Bruce Wayne, the master of Wayne Enterprises, to stoop to bank robbery. The thug blinked, startled. The name landed like a thrown pebble. David's tone was light, but the room's tension tightened at the implication. Chapter 51. Let's see who you are. From Bruce Wayne, tension 33, amazement plus 41. After David finished speaking, silence fell over the bank lobby. Bruce Wayne, the hostages, curled on the floor with their arms over their heads, exchanged confused, incredulous looks. Gotham residents might not know the mayor's name, but everyone knew Bruce Wayne. From cradle to grave, the Waynes' influence touched the city. Clothes, food, housing, transport, everything under the long shadow of the Wayne Group. Bruce Wayne was the heir to a fortune that could rival a small country. He'd been missing for years. How could he be here? Robbing a bank? I wanted to see if this Red Hood was actually the Joker, David said, so I checked his emotion markers. Red Hood 5 stared at him, a mocking smile under his mask as he sized David up. So you're saying you found Batman instead of the Joker? Red Hood 5 had been ordered to teach the unruly hostage a lesson. He stepped forward, raising his gun stock to smash David's head. Shut your mouth. If I were that kid, whose body's God knows where, would I still be standing here? David snapped. 5 roared and swung the stock. Wait! The Red Hood leader abruptly aimed his gun at 5. Boss? I don't understand. You told me to teach him a lesson and I'm doing it. 5 froze, gun still raised. Could it be? You believe this kid's rubbish? The other gang members trained their muzzles on 5, then on David. I don't know if you're Bruce Wayne, the leader said slowly, but you're certainly not 5. The leader shook his head, disdain curling his lips. 5's the only one crazy enough to use his hands instead of a gun. You're talking too much. 5's expression shifted beneath his hood. He'd planned to kick the young man into the floor and finish him off with the gun stock. Simple, brutal, quick. But he had hesitated to shoot, and that drew attention. And 5 is left-handed, the leader added, contempt thick in his voice. 5 glanced at the hand still clutching his gun, his right hand, with dawning dismay. He'd made a mistake. David's observations had been sharper than anyone expected. David suspected this Red Hood was a novice Batman, someone just starting out, not the cold, infallible Dark Knight Gotham would learn to fear. Where were the bank's security guards? Ignoring the 7 or 8 submachine guns pointed at him, David looked toward the security room. 2 shadows lay on the floor, lips purple, foam at their mouths, poisoned in advance. The robbers had been thorough. Now take off your hood, the leader said, lowering his gun with theatrical curiosity. Let's see who you are, the famous orphan of the Waynes, or some cop who thinks he can take us all on. If it really is Bruce Wayne, he won't have to worry about his next life, one thug sneered. A few of them laughed. We're not like some idiot Joe Chill who killed Gotham's richest couple over a pearl necklace. The name Joe Chill echoed through the marble lobby, a reminder of Gotham's old wounds. Under the threat of the guns, Red Hood 5 reluctantly peeled off his hood. A middle-aged face with a thick black beard stared back, angry, confused. 5? Someone said. In the heartbeat of stunned silence, 5 flicked his wrist. A miniature remote shot from his sleeve, and he slammed it down. The bank's thick glass doors shattered outward in a thunderous blast. Shards and smoke filled the lobby. The Red Hoods were knocked off their feet by the shockwave. Someone tossed a smoke bomb. 5 spun to tackle David and haul him behind the counter to avoid the expected gunfire. But when he lunged, he slammed into something solid. The shoulder he hit felt as if he'd struck a several hundred-pound bronze statue. He grunted in surprise. He hadn't expected the young man to be trained in combat. Even so, you couldn't change your mass with technique. How could he, a man who prided himself on mastering 100 styles, be unable to budge him? David didn't bother pretending to be defenseless. He glimpsed the wrinkled skin at the base of the middle-aged man's neck and smiled a little, then casually tossed the man, Batman, behind the solid wood counter. The novice Batman's instincts were still raw, but the habit of always having a fallback was already there. "Fire! Kill him!" the leader snarled. 7 or 8 submachine guns barked at once. Bullets screamed toward the counter. They punched through the wood with a metallic howl. Bruce Wayne, crouched on the floor with his head between his arms, cringed. Each golden bullet struck David, then inexplicably lost all their force and clattered to the floor. "Cease firing," the leader cursed. After the spray of bullets, the smoke began to thin. In that haze, a slender shadow stood completely still, apparently unharmed. The Red Hoods waited for him to collapse under the barrage, but nothing happened. A faint, dangerous purple light flickered in the smoke. "What is that?" one thug hissed, squinting through the haze. A streak of laser lanced out of the smoke. A thug clutching his chest stared in disbelief as a thumb-sized hole burned through his heart. He fell, blood fanned across the marbled floor. "Kill him!" Panicked shouts filled the lobby. The Red Hoods opened fire at the figure in the smoke. Behind the counter, Bruce Wayne peered over the edge, eyes wide with astonishment. Not far ahead, the young man in the trench coat, handsome, cold, utterly calm, stood with one arm raised. He shaped his fingers into a pistol, like something out of a black and white silent film. A child imagining a duel, cowboy hero against bandits. Only this wasn't make-believe. Where his fingertips pointed, purple beams scoured the air. Time seemed to slow. From the side, the figure looked casual, almost playful, as he fired steadily from a distance. But the sight was lethal. The lasers cut through leather and bone, opening neat, smoking holes in the chests of scrambling thugs. Bodies dropped, one after another. From Bruce Wayne, shock plus 43. How did this guy do that? David's powers were exacting and detached, as though he were playing a game and finding it poorly played by the Red Hoods. The newly debuted Batman, still green and shaken, crouched behind the counter and watched the stranger cleanse the lobby with an efficiency that made his own crimes, whatever they were, feel suddenly small and confused. Outside, sirens would be coming. Inside, blood and smoke hung in the marble air. The Red Hood gang had meant to make a quick score. Instead, they'd simply announced to Gotham that something new and dangerous had just arrived. Yesterday, I added an extra chapter and stayed up late. I woke up at noon with a headache. I'll shift update times slightly. There won't be fewer updates, just a bit later. The midnight release moves to tomorrow morning. I'll write more to make up for it. Sorry, and thanks for reading. The bodies hit the floor with dull thuds. The gunfire stopped. Only people cowering on the bank lobby's tiled floor remained, screaming in terror. Outside, police cruisers arrived with sirens wailing, forming a ring around the building. Cars were arrayed as cover. Gotham officers, shaking, crouched behind them, shouting through megaphones. "Don't move! Drop your weapons! Surrender immediately!" David flinched at the racket and glanced toward the street. The police looked anything but ready to save hostages. They hunkered behind their vehicles, like new recruits about to cross a machine-gun-swept trench. Some didn't even show their heads. A few, paler than paper, pointed toward the bank with fingers that trembled as if gripped by Parkinson's. "Don't worry. Gotham's finest are here. You're safe." Smiling, David picked up the cash he'd withdrawn from the teller and looked at the terrified people on the floor. A gust of wind from his movement swept the smoke aside, and he vanished. Bruce Wayne's eyes widened. He'd studied ninjutsu under the League of Assassins. He knew how a ninja could use smoke and light to vanish, and there wasn't an obvious flaw in the display. Seeing the corpses of the robbers and the police seemingly preparing to move in, Bruce dashed up to the bank's mezzanine, smashed through a window, and slipped into an alley below. The surveillance cameras had gone dark long before the robbery. After the brief episode at the counter, David had taken care of the robbers with a single, efficient motion and left. He reappeared in an abandoned alley several blocks away. He waited for the color to return to his skin, intending to find a hotel and lie low. "What brings you to Gotham?" a deep voice asked from the shadows. David turned. Red Hood 5 stood there, expression hard and cold as mountain ice. The gun he'd been holding was gone. He looked like a Greek warrior facing a monster with bare hands, muscles taut beneath his suit, ready for anything. "You dared to follow me? Aren't you afraid of joining your accomplices?" he said. "You should know I'm not a bandit," David answered. Bruce Wayne frowned. The young man before him was a walking mystery. Maybe he had some concealed high-tech weapon. Maybe he'd used an advanced invisibility trick. Most troublingly, one sentence had already hinted at knowledge of his true identity beneath the mask. "You're not a police officer either," Bruce said, "so you have no right to question me." David chuckled. Even in this early form, Bruce already carried the shadow of the man he would become. He had something of the future Batman's demeanor, intense, driven, and though his strength clearly didn't match a Superman unspent by time, he had a potency that resonated. Not a police officer? Then who else would risk infiltrating a gang to stop a robbery? Bruce's posture tightened. He'd been reckless, that much was true. He hadn't meant to make a spectacle of the bank scene. Still, he couldn't figure out where he'd revealed so much of himself. "You're right," he said slowly. "But you forgot one thing. This is Gotham." David spread his hands, the small-town kid from Metropolis offering a lesson to a Gotham native. "In this rotting city, police do part-time work at best," he said flatly. "The real jobs are for gang enforcers and informants. Like those officers outside the bank, they wouldn't risk their lives for a few $100s a day." Bruce was quiet for a moment. Gotham will not always be this way. His voice dropped to an almost private tone, the kind of oath he'd someday live by. "I hope you're right." David smiled and was about to walk away. "You don't seem convinced." Bruce stepped closer, a predator closing on its prey. Many people had different answers about whether Gotham still had hope. That didn't shake his belief. He wanted to hear this young man's take. For some reason, the stranger seemed to understand him, to see through what he'd said about Gotham. "This city once gave people life and hope," David continued, indifferent in tone. "Now it's sick, terminal. You can say it's cursed, or that the Court of Owls rules it, or that it sits on the gates of hell. The truth is simpler. Gotham is easy to destroy, hard to change. If no one steps forward with a cold, precise scalpel to cut away the rot, it'll keep festering until it dies. Like what you did, killing without mercy." Bruce's voice hardened. Years ago, when Joe Chill's case had been reopened, Bruce had thought of killing his parents' murderer the moment he walked free. Someone had stopped him then. His parents would never have wanted him to become what he hated. "You've only been here a short time, and you've already left 7 or 8 dead in this city." "Am I not allowed to defend myself against armed thugs?" David said. "I just didn't use a gun." He meant to leave it at that and stepped back. He'd come to Gotham looking for someone. This version of Bruce Wayne couldn't help him. Publicly, Wayne was still missing. If Batman had returned, Bruce was only just beginning to find his footing. He hadn't fully taken the reins of the company, and he was still piecing together what was wrong with the city. "Oh, next time, don't toss things at me, Gotham Vigilante." He plucked a tiny tracker from his trench coat and flicked it back. A gust of wind. Bruce turned his head to dodge. The coin-sized tracker, a razor of a thing, sliced the skin on his cheek and embedded itself deep in the brick wall behind him. When he looked back, the alley was empty. No one. Just a cold wind. Bruce wasn't surprised, only thoughtful. "Master Bruce?" came a voice carried on the wind. A dark motorcycle tore down the underground alley, its tires thick and seemingly bulletproof. It slid to a halt outside a bunker entrance. The rider peeled off a tattered face mask, revealing a young man's cold, focused face. He looked like steel, hardened, unyielding, driven by a purpose that trembled at the edges. "It's me, Alfred," Bruce called. "I saw the news," came the older, worried voice from the doorway, tinged with helplessness. "You've had a dangerous day, Master." "It's not over yet, Alfred," Bruce said. He took off his rose lapel, glanced at a tiny black speck concealed in its pistol, and waited for the bunker door to open. "Forgive me, Master," Alfred muttered. "Installing and running a supercomputer wasn't in the butler training curriculum." The bunker door sighed open after half a minute. "That's all right," Bruce said. "I have time." He walked slowly into the Batcave and connected the miniature camera to the giant screen. The whole bank robbery replayed. Bruce froze the image and isolated the young man's face. The screen light fell on the young man's features. Staring at that face, Bruce murmured as he hit the search key. Now, let me see who you are. Chapter 53. Stealing is not a good habit. A bird of prey had invaded the gloomy forest known as Gotham. Bruce Wayne wanted to know who had come. When he keyed in the request, the screen answered with bright red letters, "No data." Standing before the 100-inch monitor, Bruce frowned. No criminal record, no driver's license, no purchase history, no entry logs. Either this person has lived in the wilderness since birth, Alfred said, or that face is a fabrication. On the crowded streets, an umbrella in hand, David touched his face. His uncanny sight caught a tiny pinhole camera embedded in the center of what looked like a Batman emblem, but he ignored it. The face he'd seen was real enough, only subtly altered. A human face has roughly 40 muscles, he said aloud to himself, divided between expression and mastication. Skin, vessels, nerves, cartilage, and bone all interconnect. Most people can only control a few of those muscles. Talented actors tighten a few more. They can hold a mask of expression, but they can't fully remake a face. Ordinary people couldn't do that. David wasn't an ordinary person. He wasn't even quite an Earthling. His eternal, Thanos-derived physiology let him control every muscle with surgical precision. He used that control for combat, for strength, and even to reshape his features. Thanos probably never bothered, he thought. The Dark Lord wouldn't need to hide, and even if he did, he'd have magic or tech. Besides, 2 to 3 meters of purple would be hard to disguise. Passing a lamppost, he glanced at a set of high-voltage lines and thought of Avery, the man who'd come to Gotham. As the future of Superman, David didn't believe Clark Kent had truly lost his powers so easily. Superman's strength came from his genes and from being Clark. It wouldn't be simple to remove. If I catch Avery and recreate the accident, kryptonite plus a strong electric shock, maybe I can restore Clark's powers, he mused. If that failed, he could try to draw lightning on a stormy night. First, though, he had to find Avery and bring him in. Step 1. Find 2 reliable local informants and ask around. Bang! A hurried figure collided with a woman loaded down with designer bags. "Sorry!" the figure cried. The woman cursed and hurried on. David noticed, almost as an afterthought, that the sapphire ring on her hand had gone. A snatch and grab during a collision, common enough for Gotham, where petty crime was part of the air, but to steal a ring from a hand in the space of a head-on bump and get away with it unnoticed was a practiced trick. David's expression sharpened. Thieves tended to have contacts, fence channels, and local networks, people worth talking to. Good candidates for informants, he added to his mental checklist. "Young master, I don't know if you remember that Wayne Manor sits right above this cave," Alfred said, appearing at the Bat Cave's edge with a silver tray and a glass of iced coffee. He moved with the calm of someone who had seen years fold into quiet duty. "Of course I remember, Alfred," Bruce replied, taking the coffee and not looking away from the console. "How could I forget? You've been hiding down here since you returned. You've only gone up to the manor a handful of times," Alfred said, voice shaded with concern. "You have so many obligations, sir." "I have a lot to do," Bruce answered, rubbing his temples. "Urgent things." He had been tracing a withdrawal from Gotham National Bank to find a lead. The card was registered to a subordinate of a former small-time gang leader, one who'd been dead over a year. Bruce pulled the death file. A twisted neck, the body discovered in the gang's makeshift hideout, dozens of others dead nearby. A few had died of severe brain trauma. "Hyena gang," he muttered. A few escaped, but went into vegetative states. Across Gotham, dozens of gang members had suffered similar fates in the same period. Severe brain trauma, 7 or 8 left brain damaged and catatonic. The trail went cold after that. Bruce's jaw tightened. "You're rushing yourself, young master," Alfred said gently. "I worry." Bruce looked up at the man who'd raised him. "I've endured near-death trials and training that would drive lesser men mad. I thought I'd be ready when I came back. But Gotham still needs things I don't have, skills technology alone can't buy. Infiltration, sabotage, assassination, blending in, subtle investigation. Those are a different order than gadgets," Alfred reminded him. Bruce stood and walked to his workbench, sparks flashing as he polished a batarang. "I have advanced tech and powerful weapons, but some things can't be replaced by that. I need to be more precise, faster, stronger, like a bat in the night, silent, lethal, never wrong. You must protect what you already have, Alfred interrupted. If you push too hard, the company's R&D and those resources you rely on could slip away. Bruce paused. What do you mean? William Earl had been stewarding the family business during Bruce's absence. Since your disappearance, some of his moves have strayed. As chair, he's been lobbying the board to take Wayne Enterprises public, Alfred said. At that, Bruce's face darkened. Going public might be a boon for many companies, but for a family enterprise that had tied itself to Gotham's fate for generations, it was dangerous. Public shares would make diluting a missing Wayne stake worryingly easy. You're right, Bruce said slowly. Maybe it's time to let Gotham know its heir has returned. He threw a batarang that flew perfectly and embedded in a distant target. He let the throw steady him, then said, first things first. In a narrow, brick-paved alley, a young woman in black skinny jeans and a blue-striped blouse adjusted her square-framed glasses. Brown hair fell loosely around her neck. Her face, pale and unassuming, belonged to a bookish college student. Nobody would suspect her. Selina Kyle slid a small wallet into her waist bag and slipped the pinched jewelry onto her finger. The new sapphire sparkled. She smiled. A standard star sapphire, she murmured. Good quality. This will be near the top of my collection. She pushed her glasses up and admired the stone. Today had been lucky. A pretty ring on a woman who'd been too flustered by a collision to notice the theft. A magnetic voice spoke from behind without warning. Selina's reflexes were cat-like. She hid the ring and turned in an instant. Who? She asked, heart thumping. From Selina Kyle, Nervousness Teen. Chapter 54. Are you serious? Selina turned her head and met a camera lens. David nodded with satisfaction, then swiveled his phone. How's the shot? Angle good? On the screen, Selina was slipping the stolen sapphire ring onto her finger, a triumphant smile on her face like a small-time cat burglar. Delete it, she snapped. Seeing the evidence of her theft, Selina lunged for the phone. David stepped back easily, pocketing it and patting it casually. This is evidence that will be used in court. Give it back, she snarled, trying to snatch the device. She was quick and lithe, but David seemed to glide away from every reach. He never looked particularly fast, yet she couldn't even graze the hem of his coat. After a few jerky attempts, she dropped to her knees, panting like someone who rarely exercised. Then she made a show of looking past him with exaggerated surprise. What's that? You shouldn't be pulling such childish tricks, David said, uninterested, not even turning his head. Selina Kyle, Catwoman, was an international thief who specialized in jewels, artifacts, and priceless art. Her skills were legendary. She could lift a target out of the most heavily guarded vault. David didn't buy that she should be out of breath after only a few moves. As a thief, is your stamina really that low? Aren't you worried about being caught? Smack. A warning voice cut in from the alley mouth. Don't provoke anyone in Gotham, stranger, even if she's a thief. Annoyed, Selina pulled a black whip from her belt and cracked it with a fierce snap that made the air sting. She transformed in an instant from a delicate facade into a sleek, dangerous predator. You should be so lucky to only meet thieves. I just met the darkest, coldest person in Gotham. David raised an eyebrow. By the way, how did you know I was an outsider? Your trench coat is new, she said, taking off her glasses. In Gotham, where it's always raining and the streets are muddy, only two kinds of people wear a coat like that. She cracked the whip again. It lashed through the air like a black snake, aiming for his chest. David caught it casually, glanced at his coat hem splattered with mud, and smiled. Or you could be the type who buys their luxury and discards it when the weather doesn't suit them. Maybe I am, he said. Shrugging, Selina tried to heave the whip free. It was locked in his grip as if in a vice. She pushed with both hands and slipped on the wet pavement. What did your parents feed you as a kid? Oatmeal and spinach? She snapped. One little tug from him sent her flying. She landed on the far side of the alley in a spray of mud, coughing and very much disheveled. You're lighter than I thought, David said, watching her struggle to rise. How else could you run so fast if you weren't light? She stood up, clutching her side, and produced a taser. The cartridge hissed, and 2 electrodes shot forward. Let's see how you like this. Zzzt. The electrode struck, and Selena expected the usual convulsions. The device should have dropped him flat. Instead, David shrugged as if nothing had happened, plucked the barbs out of his coat, and stepped forward. "What kind of monster are you?" Panic slid through Selena like a cold needle. She glanced to the only exit. The alley mouth was blocked. "What do you want?" David unzipped his pocket and pulled out the phone, shaking it for emphasis. "Be more specific." They were in a cheap hotel apartment. She'd been caught red-handed and dragged back here under threat of prosecution. David didn't just want the ring. He wanted information. He leaned against a chair, his voice low. "Avery's in Gotham. From what I know, he didn't come here to sightsee. He came because he found a weakness in his ability and decided the solution was to come here, gather resources, and erase anything that makes him uncomfortable." A strange light caught his eyes. He'll build a force, go back to his town, dig up whatever those meteorites are, destroy them, and make sure nothing in the world can stop him. Selena fiddled with the spent taser, still dazed. "You know more about him than I do." She replayed the problem in her head. A man who would eliminate anything in his way was bad news. "You should know there are more gangs in Gotham than hotels have hot water," David said. "Tell me what's been happening here, especially anything tied to the gangs." Selena shrugged, then counted off names on her fingers like a litany. Black Mask, Carmine Falcone, the Penguin. "Just those?" David asked. "Those are the big ones," she said. "Tell me which ones you need. Recent movements, alliances, any unusual activity. That's all I'm offering." David's expression made her pause. "Are you serious?" he said softly. Selena bristled. "Are you treating them like small-town thugs who'd wet themselves if the sheriff showed up? These people, one misstep and they'll make Gotham bleed. They're not just ruthless, they're legends. It's easier to offend the mayor than to cross some of them." David considered that, then nodded. "Good. Start with Black Mask, his recent sightings, known lieutenants, and any shifts in territory. Then Falcone, Penguin. Give me movement patterns, up-and-coming crews, and anything else that's been out of the ordinary." Selena met his gaze, a dangerous smile creeping back. "You really think you can walk into Gotham and handle these monsters with a smile?" "I don't plan to handle them alone," David said. "I'm not asking you to fight them. Just tell me what you know. Help me stop Avery from making a mess of everything." She rolled her eyes, but she was still cornered, and the phone between them was passive proof of her theft. "Fine," Selena said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I'll tell you what I know. But when this is over, I want that ring back, and I want that video deleted." Chapter 55. Heart-Shaped Grass, Lost Weapon. "You want to pry into the rumors about them, to probe the shifts in their power. Aren't you worried that your boldness will stir ripples in dark water and call the sharks?" Selena stopped at his warning, then her expression hardened. "And aren't you overestimating a thief? She only wanted to steal things. This man wanted her to prod a tiger's behind. What was that but handing a gun to someone and asking them to assassinate the president? Assassinating the president might even have cleaner consequences." David, dressed in a sharp black suit, took his eyes off the rainy, bustling street below and smiled at the Catwoman perched on the sofa. "I believe you can. You're no ordinary thief." Gotham had too many notorious gang leaders. Getting sure information would certainly be faster than hunting them down one by one. Selena's tone went cold and flat. "Absolutely not." When mortal danger was on the line, the young Catwoman refused without hesitation. Drawing those people's attention and getting eaten down to the bones is worse than getting arrested. At worst, jail is only a few years. "A few years?" David raised an eyebrow, voice mocking. "Don't quietly downgrade your sentence. I'd bet the things you've stolen could total 100 years. Selena's targets weren't just jewelry. She took artifacts and priceless curios. Still, better than being dead. Hearing David's proposition, she no longer cared about his threats and moved for the door. A prison could be escaped. Guards wouldn't be tougher than the security in a private museum. She had slipped into museums as if they were her own home. Jail wouldn't hold her long. "Name your price," she offered. "I'm not interested in money." Selena's hand was already on the doorknob when a 10-cent coin, launched like a shotgun pellet, smashed the brass-covered knob into fragments. "You, what do you think you're doing?" She spun like a startled cat and dropped into a fighting stance, ready for an enemy. Did you do that with your hand? David flicked the coin back into his palm and withdrew his hand. Selena's eyes widened. You're not interested in money, and you probably have plenty of jewelry. But there are things you've never run into. He smiled with an air of mystery. Back home, there's a cave where escaped slaves hid last century. They planted a special herb there, brought from Africa, Xinxing cow, heart-shaped grass. Heart-shaped grass? Selena blinked. Eating it lets a person's physique, strength, and speed reach the limits of human capability. She eyed him skeptically. Thieves needed to be observant. They had to know who to target and who not to provoke. He sounded like he was concocting a tall tale, but the way he spoke didn't feel like a lie. And if heart-shaped grass didn't exist, how else did he explain the coin trick? So, you want the information I have, and in return you give me heart-shaped grass? Selena was half convinced, half doubtful. Are you planning another one of your dirt bike stunts? On the 13th basement level of Wayne Tower, Lucius Fox, who oversaw technology research and applications for the Wayne Group, smiled when the son of his deceased friend arrived. By the way, I saw the headline this morning. Bruce Wayne, missing for years, appears at Wayne Group's executive meeting. Bruce returned the smile. That morning, William Earl had called a board meeting to discuss the IPO. Bruce had reappeared and interrupted, making several directors who had already agreed say they needed time to reconsider. Seems Gotham hasn't quite forgotten me, he said with a wry sigh. After the day he almost shot Joe Chill, who had been released on parole, and nearly fell into darkness, he'd left Gotham. He'd been traveling, learning, honing himself, and had been out of the public eye for 6 years. Lucius regarded him fondly. Your family helped build Gotham's prosperity. They won't forget that. Mr. Fox, Bruce said, cutting to the chase. Do you have any clothing that offers special protection against laser weapons? Lucius chuckled. What's this for this time? Mountaineering, cave exploring, base jumping? He'd lent the young man a number of high-tech toys under those excuses before. Bruce hesitated. Even if he didn't explain, he didn't want Lucius to have to ask him a lie. The old man had personally handed him several pieces of equipment and would see through any pretense. They let the subject drop. Lucius led him to a covered box, pulled back a dust-streaked cloth, and produced a pair of black gauntlets. Energy-absorbing gauntlets, he said. Made from a superconducting composite, light as carbon fiber, can deflect knives and swords, and he brought the gauntlets to a workbench and tapped them with a taser. Electricity danced across the surface, the light flickered, and then it was gone. It was absorbed. Bruce's eyes lit up. Can they stop lasers too? As long as it's energy, yes, but there's a catch. Lucius grew serious. Once they hit their absorption limit, any extra energy will make them explode. And the blast, Bruce finished. If the energy was enough to pierce tank armor, imagine what would happen to a person wearing the gauntlets. They would be torn apart. Which is why it's only a prototype, Lucius said. Bruce frowned. Why not continue development? Lucius shrugged. First, most people don't face stormtroopers. Second, he gestured toward the empty floor, and his expression went somber. The Wayne Group's R&D department exists in name only. Earl thinks the legacy Wayne left will sustain us for 10 years. He doesn't want to sink millions into research right now. Lucius clasped his hands. Some investments are simple and endlessly profitable, like the AK-47, built decades ago and still in demand worldwide. Bruce's expression hardened. He had been to war zones, had seen what weapons did to people. You won't let them put Wayne's name on that. Speaking of weapons, Lucius said, his face tightening, there's something important I need to tell you. What is it? In the past few days, the Wayne Group lost a major piece of military-grade technology. That's a heavy weapon for modern warfare, a microwave emitter. It can send focused microwaves to heat and evaporate an enemy's water supply from a distance. Lucius had been kept down in the mansion's basement for years, mostly out of sight. William Earl hadn't bothered with him until a few days ago, when he suddenly sent someone to fetch detailed information about that microwave emitter. A water source? David asked. Lucius shook his head. It sounds like a crude detail, but whoever stole it must have a big objective. Dozens are already dead over it. All the crew on the freighter carrying it were killed, Lucius continued. There are no bodies, presumably thrown into the sea, but someone found this at the scene. He produced a photograph, a blood-stained ninja shuriken embedded in the ship's bulkhead. Bruce's pupils narrowed at the sight. "You know it?" Lucius glanced at him. Bruce's expression tightened, complicated, and unreadable. Of course he knew. He'd spent years learning brutal, ancient techniques in that shadowy place to harden his will, the League of Shadows. He had been ordered to kill to prove his resolve and to lead the League to destroy Gotham. He'd rebelled instead, setting explosives and blowing up the base. Now, looking at the picture, something in him remembered the damp, earthen smell that comes before a storm. His gaze became sharp. If that weapon really was connected to the League's mark, then this was not over. Burnley District, downtown Gotham. The Manchester restaurant was one of the city's finer establishments, bright, elegant, violin music drifting through the rooms. The patrons were the sort who counted their fortunes in millions. On the second floor, by a window so thoroughly cleaned it doubled as a mirror, David and Selina sat opposite one another, watching people move below them. "This the place you picked for the exchange?" David asked. "If the people you were worried about spot us, it won't matter where we trade," Selina said, spreading her hands. "They'll find you and tear you apart like hounds that smell blood. If they don't, we could do it on the sidewalk and call it a day." David showed none of the nerves she implied, only a cautious skepticism. He suspected she'd chosen an ostentatious restaurant to vent the irritation of being threatened earlier and maybe to stiff him for dinner. He glanced at the menu. A meal here would swallow a year's wages for an ordinary family in a single sitting. Selina scanned the room with that light, amused curiosity she always kept when she dressed the part of a society woman. She'd never believed a thief should be too high profile. Crime Alley lay in the East End. It was where Bruce Wayne's parents had been killed, and it was the kind of place Selina's own life had been forged in harder ways. Vroom. A sleek, silver-gray sports car rolled to a stop on the street below. Heads turned. A young man in a tailored suit stepped out, helped two glamorous models from the passenger seat, and strolled up the restaurant's stairs. The staff lit up, eyes fixed on the car. Bruce smiled a little. "That's not bad," he said. "I have something better." He climbed the stairs, perfectly put together, the city's attention following him. People greeted him like royalty. "Mr. Wayne," they said, fawning. "The son of Wayne comes back to Gotham. Turn on the news and you'll see nothing else today." Selina let out a soft, complicated sigh. Some people are born with everything. David thought of Catwoman's past. Her mother, Mary Kyle, cold and distant, who preferred cats to her daughter and who had ended her life by suicide. A father who drank and beat the girl he saw as a reminder of his wife, eventually drinking himself to death. An orphaned Selina drifting on the streets before being taken in by an institution. He thought of Bruce too, and how neither of them had the simple, sheltered lives the tabloids imagined. He didn't say it. Words like sympathy felt useless. Not far away, several Wayne Enterprises directors were dining together, invited by William Earl. One of them flicked a disdainful look at Bruce as he passed. "Bruce, you really showed up like that?" The hint of contempt was almost affectionate among the board, a way to test him, to see how he handled attention. Selina gave a small wave and called to a provocatively dressed young woman making her way up the stairs. The woman lowered her sunglasses and offered a flirtatious glance at David before sliding into the booth. Selina pushed a brown paper envelope across the table toward her. David frowned. The woman's pupils were slightly dilated. She looked tipsy. Could she be reliable? After Selina paid, she invited the woman to sit and eat. The woman snorted. "I don't like this place. Makes me jumpy." She stood, blew a theatrical kiss at David, then wobbled off down the stairs. "Mary's one of Gotham's low-level channels," Selina explained as she returned to her seat. "Her sources aren't high class. Waiters, pickpockets, beggars, nightclub dancers, street addicts, even crooked cops. But she gets people talking. Most of what she brings in is direct, first-hand stuff." David felt the familiar tug of skepticism. "She doesn't look like someone who'd stand up to the gang leaders you mentioned. Aren't they dangerous?" Selina shrugged with a kind of weary indifference. "Gotham's full of things to be afraid of. Siren wails, shattered glass, screams, filthy laughter in alleys. If you let fear run you, you get nothing done. They settled into a corner by the window. Selina ate with the ease of someone reclaiming small pleasures. David opened the envelope and sifted through Mary's notes. The intelligence inside was raw and messy. Rumors of a force willing to kill for the microwave emitter, mentions of dead crewmen, a pattern of bodies vanishing into the water. The shuriken's image had already done its work in David's mind, an old threat or something dressing up in its garb. Nearby, Bruce held himself as if the room belonged to him and no one else. David had no desire to go over and be seen with him. Batman and the world Bruce played were different things, dangerous, distant, and rarely useful as allies. For a long moment, David just read. Lately, he'd been sensing faint traces of Batman in the city. Fleeting, shadow-like, enough that the thought of him flickered through whatever plans David was trying to form. The envelope's contents folded into the unease. Someone was playing with weapons and ghosts from the past, and whatever had been supposed to be buried was not staying buried. Chapter 57. What is he afraid of? Template fusion, 36%. Throughout this time, Avery's progress in fusing the template barely slowed. Bruce Wayne couldn't stop thinking about him, morning, noon, and night, his feelings a tangled mix of confusion, suspicion, and worry. One of Batman's defining traits was paranoia. Even about friends, if he suspected a threat or the possibility of someone losing control, he would quietly draw up contingencies. The noteworthy thing was he never let himself off easier than others. If anything, he was harsher with himself. One of the contingency plans he'd prepared to prevent himself from losing control involved something extreme and specific, having someone dig up his parents' graves and stage an attack on him at his most enraged and irrational. Better to deal with Avery quickly and get back to Smallville. Compared with Bruce, Avery preferred to gain emotional points from Clark. Easier, softer. Mary's message to him was terse. No photos, only handwriting. It wasn't hard to read between the lines. Gang leaders like Falcone and Black Mask didn't usually allow themselves to be photographed. If a photo could be taken, it usually meant a shootout risk. The note said, Carmine Falcone, the Roman, has an odd injury. His hands are bandaged. He's been wearing a scarf around his neck as if hiding bruises. Avery narrowed his eyes. No need to read more. Avery must have gone to see the Roman. At a nearby restaurant, Bruce Wayne was holding court, dining and joking. When the conversation turned to the recent vigilante in Gotham, he tapped his temple and scoffed. That guy who dresses like a bat, he's probably messed up in the head. He must not have much fun in his life, another laughed. Otherwise, he wouldn't be competing with the cops for work. The manager, a small mustached man with a hint of arrogance, stepped over. Sir, please watch your companions. The pool is decorative, not for swimming. A typical playboy, all money, no manners. Bruce glanced at the two models with him. They'd stripped down to lingerie and leapt into the decorative pool, splashing like mermaids, indifferent to onlookers. The manager's patience snapped. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Apologies, Bruce said with an apologetic smile. They're rather uninhibited. He drew his checkbook and began to write. No matter how much you tip me, it won't change things, the manager said, trying to maintain decorum. Bruce doodled zeros across the page, then stood and with the casual air of someone discarding scrap paper, tucked a check of an astronomical sum into the manager's hand. I'm buying this restaurant. New rule, the pool can be used for swimming from now on. He winked, then cannonballed into the water with the two models, letting loose the playboy persona. For a moment, he glimpsed a familiar shadow that made him freeze. The models didn't notice. They splashed him in the face. Water drenched his hair and plastered it to his forehead. Bruce wiped his face. The practiced frivolity in his smile stiffened. Awkward moments were rare for him. Avery, seated at a table on the terrace, saw enough. He and Selina finished their meal and rose to leave. Bruce, you were dazzling tonight. Let's go by a few more restaurants, Selina teased, still in her black dress. Bruce smiled thinly and nodded. Did you find your target? Selina asked as they stepped into the street. Avery nodded. As he'd thought, Avery had gone to Falcone, Carmine the Roman, one of Gotham's most powerful mob bosses. Falcone's empire, the Roman Empire, had tentacles into city council and corrupt ranks of the police. People of his stature were rarely attacked. Whoever dared to do so risked brutal, bloody retaliation. Yet Falcone bore neck bruises and hand bandages, and his attacker hadn't finished him, a sign they weren't afraid of retaliation at all. "So, our deal is done?" Selena asked. Avery understood she meant the heart-shaped grass she wanted. "Next time I come to Gotham, I'll bring it to you." "Next time?" Selena's eyes widened. "Don't you know plants have seasons?" Avery smiled, then suddenly looked at her oddly. "What's that?" "What?" She turned her head. When she looked back, he was gone. The street was empty. Avery's shadow vanished as if it had never been. Selena realized she'd been tricked. Anger flared inside her. She crushed it into a hiss like a black cat baring her teeth. "Don't let me see you again, you—" Her fury stalled. She realized with a flush that she didn't even know his name. Standing there in a pricey dress with her manners not quite right for high society, passersby who'd seen her with a rich playboy likely thought she was another used and discarded woman. Someone tried to step up to chat. "Miss?" they called. Selena cut them off with a sharp, "Get lost." Night fell like ink. On an ancient estate on the outskirts of Gotham, cold-faced killers and fierce dogs prowled the grounds, patrols moving like clockwork. This was the Romans' headquarters, security and defenses tighter than some prisons. Outside the gate, a man in a sharp suit lingered, Avery. Sometimes even child's tricks still fool people, he thought. As for the heart-shaped grass, that belonged to another universe. He didn't have any on him. At least Selena had gotten the meal she wanted. Inside the estate, the Romans' master bedroom was occupied by defiant sounds. When Falcone finally emerged, his face was ashen. The man who stepped out bore the sharp, stern features of a godfather, short, neat, gray-white hair and an expression that demanded obedience. Someone rushed to speak. Falcone raised a hand to stop him. "Too close," he said, and walked on. They reached another wing of the old castle. "Did you find him?" Falcone asked. "Boss, his name is Avery Regan, a middle schooler from Smallville, Metropolis," the subordinate reported. "A middle schooler?" Falcone touched his neck, remembering. Some time ago, someone had suddenly breached his estate, ignoring all guns, appearing at his side in an instant. Falcone had grabbed him by the throat and threatened to snap it unless he submitted. That boy, a kid, had nearly choked him to unconsciousness. Humiliated, Falcone had been forced to lower himself before the intruder. For a short time, his organization became playthings, his men obedience tools. "Our people are planted around his parents," the subordinate added. "With one order, we can take them and use them as leverage." "Not yet," Falcone said. He shook his head, eyes filled with unease. That kid's skin could take submachine gun rounds. His speed was beyond human. He wasn't the ordinary target Falcone was used to. He was something else entirely, and Falcone admitted it made him uneasy. Young men like that were unpredictable, reckless, hot-blooded, capable of anything. Threatening him with his parents might be temporary leverage, but it may not work long-term. "How long do we wait?" one of his confidants asked. Falcone frowned. "What is he afraid of?" His Manali murmured the question aloud. Falcone's expression darkened. "That kid's wary of something," he said finally. "I've probed him several ways. I even tried to provoke him to unite Gotham's underworld with his abilities, but he hesitated. He only agreed to accumulating assets and personnel, to obey commands, vaguely. He's afraid of something." They all frowned. What could make someone with that kind of power hesitant? Before they could puzzle it out, the window exploded inward. Glass shards flew across the room, and a cold figure, moving with lethal speed, tore through the opening like a cannonball. Chapter 58. Remarks on the launch. The listing may seem sudden, but the time has come. The book has finished collecting all the recommendations it was eligible for, and now it's ready to be launched. Thank you to everyone who has been following along. Eyes issue, am extremely grateful and bow my thanks. Today's release included 2 chapters, one of about 2,500 words and another around 2,900. With the 800-plus words from last night's free bonus chapter, that's over 6,000 words in total, which is my usual daily output as a disabled writer. After this launch, I guarantee at least 3 updates a day, sometimes 4. I hope you'll continue to follow the story. About the usual sob story that comes with a launch. I don't want to dwell on it. Something truly devastating happened to me this past month, but I instinctively resist using personal misfortune to gain sympathy. I won't bring my troubles and annoyances into your reading experience. I know my writing still has room to improve, but I will do my best to write well and stay on track. If any part causes controversy, I will correct it immediately. Finally, thank you all again. Please subscribe. Chapter 59, He is There. Late at night, under the weak yellow glow of a street lamp, Jonathan drove his pickup down a quiet suburban road. He had just finished a delivery and a worry sat on his face like weight. So much had happened in the last few days. His eldest son had suddenly lost his abilities. His younger son had been hiding his powers all these years. And to chase Avery, they'd left the small town and gone to Gotham. Still, the constant contact from his younger son over the last couple of days had eased Jonathan and his wife somewhat. Just heard on the phone, David found Avery. He should be back soon, his wife had said, and the worry on Jonathan's face eased a little. Beep, beep, beep. A ramshackle blue car behind him began to toot insistently. Jonathan frowned, turned the wheel to pull over and let it pass. The horn kept blaring like the driver's backside was on fire. Hey, buddy, what's the hurry? He called, annoyed, rolling down his window. The car beside him didn't seem to notice. Behind the wheel sat a disheveled middle-aged man in a stained white lab coat, the look of a once promising scientist reduced by years of neglect. He was talking into his phone with trembling hands, elated. Richard, I did it! I really did it! Ha! In the passenger seat, a strange flower sat sealed in a glass jar, like a sunflower blown up to the size of a platter, its petals a pale, moon-like yellow. The man stared at it as he talked, eyes blazing as if he were beholding the greatest discovery of the century. It's you. What time is it, Hamilton? I'd finished dinner and was about to sleep. You call me now? On the other end, a calm voice that sounded used to humoring eccentricity said, Hamilton, what are you talking about? Hamilton's tone was feverish. Listen, I succeeded. Well, half succeeded, but it's enough to restore my reputation. Once a hot name in scientific circles, he'd worked on lunar samples as part of a national team and had been tipped for the Nobel. Then he'd published a ridiculous, unsubstantiated paper on the role of meteorites in gene evolution and mutation, and his career had collapsed. Funding and honors dried up, and he'd retreated to the woods to continue his experiments alone. I used a meteorite to force the genes of a local plant, the so-called devil flower, to evolve. It used to require impossible conditions and was extinct in most places. Now it'll grow in ordinary soil. You have to see it. Help me make a statement. Devil flower doesn't sound good, the person on the phone replied dryly, as if humoring a madman. Hamilton didn't care. Excitement drove him on. He gestured with one hand while gripping the phone with the other, eyes unfocused. A rock on the road jolted the car. Driving one-handed, he lost control. The tires screamed. The vehicle veered toward the roadside. No! The car sped up a roadside slope, flipped, spun, and came down upside down. Metal shrieked, a flash. Then the pickup's headlights illuminated the wreck. Jonathan's irritation vanished. Seeing a car overturned ahead, smoke leaking from it, he didn't gloat about being honked at. He jumped out and ran over. He pried open the crushed door, hauled the driver, unconscious, blood on his forehead, out onto the gravel. At his feet, glass and soil scattered from the shattered jar. The flower had slipped free. Its broken pot lay like a halo. It was as big as a silver platter, a yellow disc with a faint green glow. A strange, sweet scent rose from it, and a peculiar warmth crept across Jonathan's skin. He noticed, but there were more pressing things. The wreck was starting to smoke, and an acrid smell rose. He dragged the man farther from the burning car, and after 2 quick breaths, dialed 911. Behind thick curtains in a dimly lit room, things were very different. Avery lay bare-chested on a soft, expensive bed, muscles relaxed, 2 models with flushed faces lounging beside him and occasionally feeding him fruit like attendants. A newly installed projector cast a game across the wall. The tiny figure on screen unleashed a machine gun, mowing down enemies in a jubilant massacre. The thrill of it made Avery grin. Everything had fallen into place in Gotham. With the lightning-granted power at his back, he had crushed one of the city's powerful gangs and was living the life he'd only dreamed of. Still, it wasn't enough. The meteorite problem gnawed at him. Until he eliminated it, he felt tethered, vulnerable. Falcone's money and muscle were already coming together, he told himself. Once he had gathered every meteorite the town had, taken them from residents by persuasion or force, and destroyed the rest hidden underground. Nothing on Earth could stop him. He wouldn't have to hide anymore. The world would be his playground. When that day comes, I'll do whatever I want. He mashed buttons with fever in his eyes, like a tyrant plotting conquest. Suddenly, glass shattered. A shadow with bat-like wings spread behind the window, and a figure slammed through the glass and into the room. Who? Assassin! Protect the boss! The place erupted into chaos. People bolted for guns. Outside, in another ancient stone-walled manor, someone watched a single lit window, a small clue in a long row of dark architecture. Through a slit in the curtains, it looked like a few people inside were arguing, but they weren't mere henchmen. David, unwilling to waste time dealing with guards and muscle, planted his feet and unleashed everything he had. He launched himself like a cannonball, flying 70-80 meters through the night air, and burst into the room in a thundering crash. "Are you Carmine Falcone?" he demanded. Glass and cries filled the air. Men raised weapons and fired. "How did he get up here? This is the 5th floor." The gunfire rattled the room. Tat, 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 submachine guns reporting. Bullets struck David in a spray, but they did nothing. They failed to tear his clothes or harm him. Their force dissolved like static. David moved with a terrible calm. He flipped a heavy mahogany desk beside the window. A 100-pound slab of wood flew across 6 or 7 meters, cartwheeling through the air, and slammed into 2 men at the doorway, knocking them flat and blocking the exit. For a moment, every face froze. "You haven't answered my question," David said. He looked at Falcone with cold, unblinking eyes, an aura of pressure that made the whole room shrink. Carmine Falcone, surrounded and shielded by bodyguards, froze. Then he forced a show of indignation, as if theatrically affronted. But once he saw the man before him, bulletproof and unafraid, his tone changed. He bowed slightly, hand to chest, a smile of servility practiced on a lifetime of bargaining. "Sir, I am Falcone. How can I help you?" He didn't behave like a mob boss cornered by an intruder. He behaved like a broker in the presence of a wealthy client. David's voice was flat. "An unusual fellow came here. Where is he?" Falcone hesitated. For a moment, he seemed to understand what the boy wanted, what threat Avery represented. In the last few days, 2 monsters who shrugged off bullets had barged into his manors. Maybe, he thought, this was the chance to rid himself of that looming threat. Falcone almost answered, eagerness bleeding through his restraint, when a roar rose outside the shattered window. The night wind howled. From another nearby keep a new spark flared. An alarm, a flash. Someone shouted, and a disheveled figure with bat-like wings glided down onto a terrace. Staring across the dark, pointing with a gloved hand, he called back, breathless, "He's in that room." The single sentence cut through the chaos and landed like a thrown stone. He's in that room." Falcone pointed, face hard as stone. It had once been his bedroom, but now it looked ransacked. He couldn't tell if the world had shifted, or if monsters had multiplied overnight, if the gang headquarters that used to hush crying children had become a playground for anyone who wanted to stroll in. "Batman?" Bruce glided in on his cape, the memory fiber material stiffening into wing-like surfaces when electrified. He landed lightly, cowl low, eyes scanning. Gotham was thick with gangs and villains. Tonight he meant to strike. He'd broken into Falcone's mansion intending to rough the Don up, drag him out, strip him down to his underwear, and hang him from the bat signal as an example. But the man standing by the shattered window was not Falcone's usual old, frail image. He was a different kind of threat entirely. By the broken window, a shirtless figure with a hard expression waved away choking smoke, watching the retreating servants with the contempt of someone looking at bugs. It was Avery. Bruce narrowed his eyes, then something else snagged his attention. Another figure he didn't recognize. Before he could speak, the young man was beside him in a blink. He wrapped huge, iron-hard fingers around Bruce's throat and lifted, the grip stronger than an elephant's. Striking Avery's neck had felt like hitting thick rubber. The impact vibrated up Bruce's arm. He groped for words as a bright pain throbbed in his windpipe. When he reached for the tear gas canister on his belt, the stranger snatched it away with lightning speed. Bruce tried to deploy the emitter anyway, spraying the man, then dove out the window and launched a magnetic batarang loaded with a small charge. The device hit the man squarely and detonated, but it did not cut him. As Bruce finished his glide, he searched for an injury on the man and found none. Then the shirtless figure vanished, one instant there, the next gone, as if a frame had been removed from the world. Bruce landed, rolled to absorb the fall, intent on leaving. He still needed answers. This wasn't the intended target. Something grabbed him like a ghost. A powerful hand closed around him and lifted him from the ground. Avery's voice was all contempt. "Where do you think you're going, freak?" The grip tightened until Bruce's face flushed red. He reached for his utility belt. Avery's other hand spun the tear gas canister between his fingers, amused. "The same trick? You think you can fool me twice?" A dull thud cut the exchange. Something or someone fell from the 5th floor without any cushioning, a 1,000-pound weight dropping from the sky. Flagstones cracked, debris scattered, dust roiled. Both men looked toward the impact. Avery's frown deepened. Ever since he had gotten his abilities, smoke no longer blocked his sight. In the clearing dust stood a tall, lean figure, muscles taut against bone, apparently unhurt by the fall. Floodlights on the mansion's roof painted the scene in bright white. The figure in the light seemed familiar to Bruce, and when the dust settled, David stepped forward. "It really is you," David said. Bruce felt like Gotham was suddenly overrun by predators. He should have recognized David from school. Avery and David were in the same grade, but David looked different now. Something in him exceeded mortal limits. Avery's face darkened. He shrugged Bruce aside as if swatting at trash. "My back." Bruce hit a flowerbed edge and staggered up, clutching his side. "Grab him," Avery barked, and his gang converged on Batman. Avery, though, kept his focus on David, curiosity and challenge mingling in his voice. "You, like me, have powers beyond mortals. How did you get them?" Avery had the proud tone of someone who thought himself a god and expected obedience. David scoffed. "Not by being struck by lightning." Avery's face shifted. That was his biggest secret. How did this stranger know? Could multiple people have been granted powers by lightning? He felt unnerved. Meanwhile, Batman, suited and battered, fought off the closing assassins and hounds. He tasted the normal Gotham he knew in the chaos. These two men looked like they had stumbled in from another world. David's voice cut through the fight, low and cold. "You stole someone else's power and came here to cause trouble." He looked at Avery, living in an old castle, surrounded by thugs, clearly comfortable in a life of influence. And his words were icicles. "You dragged me into this and forced me to chase you here. If you weren't useful, I'd deal with you right now." David thought of Clark and the ability transfer plan. It was a nuisance to keep Avery alive long enough to try to move the power back. Creak, the metallic sound of something tearing in the mansion. Avery flung a streetlight at him like a spear. The lamppost screamed through the air with a slicing wind. David stood calm. Two intense beams of light erupted from his eyes, melting half the pole into molten iron as it flew. The other half spun past, tearing into the castle wall behind Avery. David's expression barely changed. He narrowed his eyes and fired again, a far thicker, more concentrated laser that burned like a furnace and warped the air itself. Avery's face went white. He crossed his arms instinctively to shield his face, but the raw force shoved him backward, his legs sliding as if pushed by a bulldozer. He had thought himself invincible. The searing heat across his arms proved otherwise. Pain flared like sparks on his skin. "Ah!" He stumbled back, shaken, now aware that this stranger could hurt him. For a moment he wanted to run, but then he saw something. David's reactions lagged. The man's head wasn't turning fast enough to follow him. A predatory grin split Avery's face. "You are strong," Avery snarled, "but not strong enough. I've found your weakness." "Oh," David asked. "You are too slow." Time snapped taut. Avery hit his extreme speed. The world around him became viscous. The wind crawled. In less than 1/100th of a blink, he was at David's side. His fist carried on an almost solid wall of compressed air, the punch of a man moving dozens of times the speed of sound. Speed is power. The blow he aimed would have shredded steel. White shockwaves rolled outward as the air compressed. David, unmoved, put his hands behind his back, clenched his fists, and punched forward with a violence that echoed with the energy of the universe. The impact struck like a meteor. The ground buckled, earth heaving and cracking in long fissures. The mansion shuddered, glass shattered in the nearby towers. Falcone and his men by an upstairs window were blown backward, tumbling. Inside, the gang assassins and hounds battling Batman were flung like scraps of paper by the blast. Batman, seeing the disaster unfold, shot his grappling hook, snagged a streetlight, swung, and dove behind a flower bed to avoid the worst of it. Under the purple wash of energy, Avery spun through the air, his skin flushed as if scalded. He smashed into the ground, coughing and clutching his chest, staring dumbfounded at the figure still standing calmly amid the cracked earth. "This is impossible," he gasped.